Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 6 true stories. From people who saw their dead relatives in cemeteries, we step into a colder darkness, a place where memory and reality blur, and the dead don't always stay where we leave them. These aren't legends. These aren't rumors. These are real encounters. From people who walked into a cemetery and came face to face with someone they buried long ago. Every account you're about to hear comes from witnesses who swore they saw the impossible, familiar faces moving through the fog, voices calling from between the stones, and footsteps that belong to the dead. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers drift in, listen, and vanish back into the night without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you, and if there's a cemetery in your town where someone you love is buried. And if anything strange has ever happened there, write it below, because when grief lingers and the world grows quiet, sometimes the dead find their way back. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. My name is Gregory, and I'm from New Hope, Pennsylvania. I've lived here most of my life, on and off. It's one of those old river towns where you always end up running into somebody's aunt or someone who swears they remember you from kindergarten, even if you don't. The streets are narrow, the brick sidewalks are uneven, and there's always a flag or a wreath on at least half the doors. People come here for the antique shops and the little cafes. The part I live in isn't the pretty postcard side, though. It's just a quiet residential street that dead ends at the hill. My house sits right across from the cemetery. I mean directly across. Front porch, 2 lanes of asphalt, low brick wall, then graves. When I say cemetery, don't picture some huge place with mausoleums and long drives. This one is small, probably half a block wide. Victorian era, mostly, from what I can tell from the dates. Old stones, a lot of them darkened and green at the bottom. The grass tries to swallow them in the summer. Some of the markers lean. In the middle, there's this broken angel statue, one wing gone, one arm missing, staring down at nothing. I moved back about 3 years ago, after my divorce. I got a job as a claims examiner with a regional insurance company in town. It's boring work, honestly. Screens, forms, people arguing over what's covered and what's not. 9 to 5, pretty regular. I actually like the routine. I drive home, park on the street, and most days I sit on the porch for a few minutes before going in, just to let my brain switch off. I don't live alone, though. My cousin Leah moved in with me a year after I came back. She'd gotten a job over in Doylestown and needed a place to stay for a while until I figure things out, which has turned into more or less permanent. We grew up seeing each other on holidays and summers, the kind of cousin that's almost like a sibling. She works long hours at a vet clinic, so her schedule is all over the place. Early mornings, odd evenings, sometimes weekends. Leah liked the cemetery right away. Built-in quiet neighbors, she said the first week, holding a mug of coffee and leaning on the porch railing. Can't beat that. I remember telling her that when I was a kid, I used to ride my bike along that brick wall. My mom would call from the doorway and tell me not to bother the dead, which I always thought was funny. It never felt scary, just old. Even now, the place is almost peaceful most of the time. Birds hop along the stones, squirrels dart along the wall, and in the fall, the leaves gather in drifts around the graves. The cemetery has a low brick border, like I said. No tall gate, just a little gap where a short decorative iron arch frames the entrance. There's a gravel path that loops through it. If you walk along it, you notice little things, like how a bunch of stones have the same year of death on them, 1893, 1893, 1893. I always figured there was some illness or something then. and a lot of the dates are so worn you have to squint to see them because of the moss. I'd gotten used to seeing all that every day. I'd drink my coffee in the morning and watch the sun hit the stones at an angle so they looked taller. In the evenings, after work, I'd see dog walkers cutting past, or kids taking a shortcut along the wall, even though you're not supposed to climb it. It was just part of the background of my life. For a while, everything was normal. If you'd asked me then if I believed in anything weird, I'd have told you no without even thinking. The first thing I remember that felt off wasn't dramatic at all. It was just the cemetery gate. One Thursday night, I came home late from work. There'd been an issue with a claim and we stayed past 7. It was early spring, still cold but not freezing. The street lamps had just come on, that weird yellow light over the road. As I pulled up, my headlights hit the cemetery entrance, and the little iron gate, the one under the arch, was swinging back and forth. There wasn't any wind, not even a breeze that I could feel. The branches on the trees were still. But the gate kept moving, slow, like someone had just passed through. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there a second, watching it. It didn't slam or anything. It just kept tapping softly against the brick on one side. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it could have been anything. Someone cutting through a minute before I arrived, maybe. Or the metal was loose. Or I just hadn't noticed that the air was moving. By the time I got out of the car and crossed the sidewalk, it had settled. I went inside, dropped my keys in the bowl, and didn't think much of it. A couple of days later, I noticed something else. There's this one grave near the Broken Angel. The stone is smaller than most of the others, with a curved top. The dates are worn, but the year, 1893 again, shows up if the light hits it right. I'd walked past it 100 times. What I hadn't seen before was the flowers. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd gone out with Leah to stretch our legs and get some air. We cut through the cemetery like we sometimes did, just to avoid walking around the block. She had her hands shoved in her jacket pockets, and I was crunching on the gravel, listening to it under my shoes. "Hey," she said, nudging me with her arm. "Check that out." There were fresh flowers on that small grave, not store-bought bouquets or anything. Just a few cut stems, placed carefully against the base of the stone. I think they were daffodils, bright yellow. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone come in here," I said. "Maybe someone from town," she said. "Some old family. People get sentimental in spring." That made sense. We walked on. But after that Sunday, I started noticing the flowers more. The daffodils wilted and browned and then disappeared. A week later, there were new ones. When those faded, there were daisies. Then, when summer came, somebody left a little jar with water and clover inside. I never saw anyone come or go, and my office window at home faces that direction. I'd be sitting at the dining table doing work stuff or reading emails, and if anyone had been there more than a minute, I think I would have seen them. Still, it wasn't impossible. People move quietly. I wasn't staring out the window all day. If you'd told me then that was anything more than some devoted descendant, I would have laughed. Leah was the one who started joking about our grave. "You see your favorite today?" she'd say, pouring coffee. "You mean your favorite?" I'd say. "You're the one obsessed with it." She'd shrug and lean on the sink, barefoot, watching through the window. I just like knowing somebody still cares. These old folks outlast all of us. We had a neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, who lived 2 doors down in a narrow blue house with a sagging porch. She was in her 70s, white hair in a bun, always hanging out on her steps with a crossword book. She'd been there as long as I could remember. One evening, Leah and I stopped to say hi on our way back from the grocery store. The air smelled like cut grass and someone grilling down the block. The cemetery was behind us, the stones just visible over the brick wall. "You two settling in all right?" Mrs. Ellis asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's good to be back." Leah jerked her head toward the wall. You know anything about that place? The cemetery? Mrs. Ellis glanced past us, just briefly. Old families, she said. Old money, some of them. Town history. They've been there longer than any of us. Who keeps up the flowers? Leah said. On that small stone by the broken angel. Someone's out there pretty often. Mrs. Ellis's mouth tightened in this small, almost polite way. Must be one of the historical society people, she said. They fuss over things. Her voice didn't match her words, though. It went flatter, and she went back to her crossword quicker than before. We walked away, and Leah whispered, "That was weird, right?" "She's just old," I said. Older people get cagey about everything. That was my default answer for a lot back then. Someone's just old, just tired, just busy. There's always a simple reason if you want one badly enough. Things stayed like that for a while. Little harmless oddities. The gate moving when there wasn't much wind. Flowers appearing when I could swear I hadn't seen anyone all day. Our porch motion light clicking on in the middle of the night, the way it does when a cat crosses the yard. Then the disturbances started to line up. It was a Tuesday in late summer when I first heard my name. Not loud, not clear, just tucked into the sound of the wind in a way that made me stop. I was sitting on the porch after dinner. Leah was at work, late shift at the clinic. The air was heavy and warm, and you could hear insects buzzing in the trees along the cemetery. The porch light over my head flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere across the street, the leaves rustled. It was the kind of soft, steady movement that could have been a breeze. Under it, very faint, I heard, "Greg." Just that. Not Gregory, which is what my mom calls me. Just Greg, in this low, familiar tone that could have been anybody's. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The boards creaked under my feet. I listened. The insect noise stopped for a moment, like someone had turned down the volume. Then a car passed at the end of the block, and the normal sounds came back. I told myself it was just one of the neighbors calling for someone with a similar name. Or the wind pulling at a loose shingle, and my brain trying to make it into something. You can hear anything in noise if you stare at it long enough. A few days after that, I was in the kitchen on a Saturday morning making coffee. Leah was still in bed. The sun was coming in low and bright, lighting up dust in the air. Through the window, I could see the cemetery, the broken angel, the stones, the patch of grass where that one grave sat. There were fresh flowers again. Wildflowers this time, purple and white. Our back door has a chain lock besides the regular deadbolt. We always use both at night because the latch is old. That morning, after coffee, I went to take the trash out. When I reached for the locks, I realized the deadbolt was turned, but the chain was off. The door was just resting in the frame. I frowned, opened it, and stepped onto the little back stoop. The trash cans are along the fence line. As my foot hit the concrete, I heard the crunch, grit under my shoe. I looked down. There was a dusting of light gray dirt across the threshold, like someone had shaken out a rug there. It wasn't from our yard. Our soil is dark, and this looked almost like the fine, pale dirt you see around old stones, mixed with tiny bits of gravel. I glanced at the yard. The gate to the alley was closed. No footprints. No sign of anyone. I swept the dirt up and convinced myself it had been there forever, and I just noticed. Leaves, dust from the alley. Whatever. That afternoon, Leah came into the kitchen, rubbing her arms. "Do you feel that?" she said. "Feel what?" "It's colder by the front door," she said, "like just right there. The rest of the room is normal, but if you stand by the door, it's a few degrees down, I swear." I went and stood by the door. I didn't feel anything dramatic, maybe a tiny draft along the bottom. Old houses settle and shift, seals wear out. I told her that, and she rolled her eyes at me. "You'd explain away a ghost if it punched you in the face," she said. "What ghost?" I said, laughing. "The one with a membership to the Historical Society?" She snorted, but she didn't smile as much as she usually did. Later that week, I had to go to the municipal building to sort out some paperwork about our property tax assessment. Boring stuff. I ended up talking with a clerk named Alan, who looked like he'd been working there since the 80s. His desk was a mess of folders, coffee rings, and a little electric fan pointed at his face. When he pulled our file, I noticed there were more pages than I expected. Old survey maps, typewritten notes from decades ago. "What's all that?" I asked, pointing. "Old lot line adjustments," he said. "Back when the town shifted some parcels around, your street got sliced up a bit." "Because of the cemetery?" I said. He paused for a second, flipping through. "Partly," he said. "They reconfigured the boundaries. Some of that land used to be part of the church property. The cemetery too." "You mean my house is on what used to be cemetery?" I tried to say it jokingly. He didn't laugh, he just shrugged. "They moved some things. Stones, mostly. It's all in here." He tapped the folder. "The church handled the rest." "What do you mean by stones, mostly?" I asked. Alan pressed his lips together like he'd said too much. "I'm not the guy to ask," he said. "If you've got questions, talk to the Historical Society. They love this stuff." On the way home, his phrasing stuck in my head. Stones, mostly. Not graves, not people, just stones. That night, Leah came home late. The street was quiet. You could hear a train horn far away and one dog barking somewhere uphill. I was on the couch, watching TV, when I heard the front door open and slam shut harder than usual. "Greg?" she called. Her voice sounded tight. "In here," I said, grabbing the remote. "Everything okay?" She came into the living room, cheeks flushed, eyes wider than normal. "Did you just come up the porch steps?" "No," I said. "I've been right here." "I heard someone come up," she said, clear as anything. 2 sets of footsteps, one heavier, one lighter. Then the door handle rattled, like someone changed their mind and let go. "Probably the wood shifting," I said. "This place creaks at weird times. Or it could have been somebody walking past on the sidewalk." She shook her head. "No, it was right outside. And when I opened the door, it was just nothing. But the porch light was already on." "Well, it's motion activated," I said. "Yeah," she said. "I know." She went to bed early that night. I stayed up later than I meant to, scrolling on my phone, listening to the house. The radiator knocked a few times, even though it wasn't cold enough to be on. The fridge hummed. At some point, the insects outside went quiet for a stretch, and I caught myself holding my breath without knowing why. A few days after that, I woke up around 3 in the morning. Not from a nightmare, just awake. It was too quiet. No cars, no dogs, not even the little ticking noise of the pipes. The kind of quiet that feels heavy. I lay there for a minute, staring at the faint rectangle of lights around the edges of my curtains. The street lamp always leaks a little in. Then I heard it from the hallway outside my bedroom. My name. Gregory. It was barely above a whisper, like someone calling from the next room, not wanting to wake anyone else. It sounded familiar, not like Leah at all. Deeper, slower. More like my father's voice when he was tired. I sat up, heart going faster. "Yeah?" I said before I could stop myself. No answer. I got out of bed and opened my door. The hallway was empty, just the faint orange glow from the street sneaking past the frosted glass at the front. Leah's door was mostly closed, a thin line of darkness where it didn't quite meet the frame. Her white noise machine was on, that soft static hiss she uses to sleep. I walked to the front door and touched the knob. It was cold, colder than the rest of the metal in the house. I checked the locks. Deadbolt, turned, chain, on. The next morning, I told myself it was one of those sleep paralysis adjacent things. You know how your brain can throw voices at you when you're in between sleep and waking? I didn't mention it to Leah. A couple of weekends later, I went into town to the Historical Society building. It's in an old stone house near the center, full of glass cases and black and white photos of the town back when everyone wore hats. I told the woman at the front desk I was interested in learning more about the cemetery on my street. She was probably in her 60s, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. "Which one?" she asked. "The little one on Walnut," I said, "across from number 27. "Oh," she said, and her tone changed just a little, the way Mrs. Ellis's had. "That's the old Hill Street burial ground, though it hasn't been called that in a long time." I asked if there were records of who was buried there, mentioning the repeated year, 1893. She nodded and led me to a binder. The pages were photocopies of older ledgers, neat handwriting and faded ink. I ran my finger down the list, family names I recognized from street signs around town. A cluster of deaths in 1893, all within a few months. No explanation written in the margins. My eye caught on one entry halfway down. Infant, surname Ellis, 1893. No first name. "Some sort of epidemic?" I asked. "Likely," she said. "We had waves of fever back then. People didn't always write down the cause." When I asked about the property lines, the woman flipped to another section, frowned, and then shut the binder halfway. "You'd need to talk to the church about that," she said. "We only have partial records from when the city restructured that block." "What do you mean by partial?" I said. "There were removals," she said. "Relocation of some stones when the road was widened and new houses went up." She looked at me over her glasses. "Let's just say not everything got documented as carefully as it should have." "Are you saying there might still be graves under the houses?" I tried to say it lightly, but my voice came out thinner than I wanted. She didn't answer that. She just gave this small, sympathetic smile. "Those lots have been lived on for a long time," she said. "If anything was deeply wrong, I think someone would have done something by now." That didn't make me feel better. After that, I couldn't help seeing the cemetery and my house like pieces of a puzzle shoved together the wrong way. The low brick wall didn't look like a boundary anymore. It looked like a suggestion. A line someone drew after the fact. The next crossing, if you want to call it that, was small, almost nothing. One evening, I came home from work, dropped my messenger bag by the door like I always do, and went into the kitchen to start dinner. Halfway through chopping onions, I remembered I'd left a claim file I needed to review in my bag. I wiped my hands, walked back to the front hall, and stopped. My bag wasn't by the door. It was on the little table under the front window, propped neatly, with the zipper half open. That table faces the cemetery. "Leah?" I called. She came out of her room, earbuds in. "Yeah?" "Did you move my bag?" "No," she said. "I just got home like 10 minutes ago. I haven't touched anything." We looked at each other, then at the bag. "I must have put it there and forgotten," I said. "Long day." "Sure," she said. But her face didn't say sure at all. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat at that table with the file open and realized the claim I was looking at involved a headstone, damage from a falling tree at a cemetery a few towns over. The photos in the file showed broken stone, cracked angels, names half wiped away. I actually laughed a little at the coincidence. Not a happy laugh, more like a sharp exhale. Around midnight, as I was getting ready to go to bed, I noticed the porch light flickering through the curtain. On, off, on, off. That usually means something stuck in the sensor, like a moth. I went to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The air was colder than it should have been for late summer. The insects were quiet again. Across the street, the cemetery lay in that flat orange light from the street lamp. The broken angel looked sharper. The small grave in front of it was just a dark shape. As I stood there, I heard footsteps on gravel, slow, deliberate, coming along the path that runs parallel to the road. They got closer, then stopped. "Hello?" I called, feeling stupid as soon as I said it. Nothing. I waited, watching for movement. There was none. But the smell of damp earth rolled over the brick wall, like someone had just dug a deep hole on the other side. The next morning, there were muddy footprints on our hallway floor. Not big, not dramatic. A faint trail of darker patches, like someone with slightly wet shoes had come in, walked 3 or 4 steps, then stopped. The prints started just inside the front door and ended halfway down the hall, near the spot where Leah had said it felt colder. I checked the door. Locked. Chain on. No sign of forced entry. Leah came out of the bathroom, towel around her hair, and saw them. "Okay," she said slowly. "You can't tell me that's just pipes now." "Maybe you came in last night and didn't notice," I said. "Or I did. Or Mrs. Ellis's cat got adventurous." She stared at me. "Greg, listen to yourself." "I'm listening," I said. "I'm listening, and I'm hearing an older guy who doesn't want to panic over a little dirt." "Right," she said. "Well, I heard Dad last night," she added quietly. I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She leaned against the wall. "I woke up around 2. I was sure I heard him call my name from the hallway. Not like a dream. Like he was standing outside my door. Same tone he used when he wanted me to come downstairs and not wake Mom. And when I opened the door, it was just dark and cold. And I could smell." She stopped. "Smell what?" "Wet leaves," she said. "Like when we used to visit his grave after it rained." We didn't talk much after that. Just cleaned up the prints, if that's what they were, with paper towels and went on with our day. That's what you do. You fold the weird stuff into the normal routine and pretend it fits. It was about a week later when I finally walked over to that small grave alone. I'd been avoiding it, without consciously deciding to. I'd cross the street further down or cut through the alley instead of using the main entrance. This time, late on a Sunday afternoon, I made myself go. The air was starting to turn crisp. You could smell smoke from someone's fireplace. My shoes crunched on the gravel path as I walked past the broken angel. The flowers were there again. Not wildflowers this time, but a small bunch of white chrysanthemums, stems wrapped in a rubber band. Fresh, no browning at the tips. I stood in front of the stone and squinted at the inscription. The moss covered most of it, but I could make out parts. Surname first, worn but readable. It wasn't mine or Leah's. It was a name I recognized from somewhere else in town. A street, maybe. Or a shop. The first name was mostly gone. The death year, 1893, stood out pretty clear. Under that, smaller letters. Beloved child, taken too soon. Something about the size of the stone made my chest tighten. It wasn't quite as small as an infant's marker. More like a child old enough to run, young enough to be watched every second. A movement to my left made me turn. Mrs. Ellis was standing a few yards away, near the wall, as if she'd just come through the entrance. I hadn't heard her, no crunch of gravel, nothing. "Didn't mean to startle you," she said. "It's fine," I said. "I was just looking." She walked over slowly, her shoes somehow quiet on the path. She looked down at the stone between us. "Someone's been leaving flowers here," I said. "Yes," she said. "They have." "Do you know who?" She pressed her lips together. The skin around her eyes looked more tired than usual. "Some things don't change, even when they should," she said. I waited for her to say more. She didn't. "Did this kid die in whatever happened in 1893? I asked. Mrs. Ellis looked at me then, really looked, like she was measuring something. "There was sickness," she said. "And there was confusion. Records got mixed, families buried where they could. Then the town came along years later and decided to tidy it all up." She glanced toward my house. "Moved what they thought needed moving. Stones, mostly, I said before I could stop myself. Her eyebrows went up just a little. Yes, she said quietly. Stones, mostly. I felt a chill run through me, even though the sun was still out. So there might be... She cut me off by shaking her head. You live there now, she said. People have lived there for decades. They married, had kids, watched TV, argued about bills. Life goes on. Whatever's under that street, under those houses, has had a long time to get used to it. That doesn't really answer my question, I said. It's the only answer anyone ever gave me, she said. Her voice softened. You're not the first to ask, and you won't be the last. We stood there for a moment. The wind moving through the trees. Somewhere a crow called and then went quiet. Why are the flowers always fresh? I asked her, she says. It's like they're replaced as soon as they start to fade, but I never see anyone. Mrs. Ellis's face did something complicated. Sadness, maybe, and something like shame. Grief is a habit, she said finally. Some people never break it, even when they're gone. I didn't know what to do with that. It sounded like a line from a story, not something a quiet neighbor would say on a Sunday. But she just nodded once, turned and walked away. Her steps on the gravel were louder this time. That night, back at the house, I pulled out the property file I'd copied from the municipal office. There was an old map, faint lines, and numbers. Our house lot, the cemetery lot, the street between. In the margin, in a different handwriting than the rest, someone had written, "Burials relocated. See church record. Some stones removed. Exact locations uncertain." I traced the sketch with my finger, following a faint circle that seemed to overlap both the cemetery and part of what would now be our front yard and the hallway inside. Leah came in and watched over my shoulder. So, she said. So maybe we're sitting on someone's old boundary line, I said. Maybe the graveyard never really stopped where the wall is. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she pointed at the lounge where the hallway begins. That's where it's cold, she said, right on that line. I slept badly that night. Every normal house sound turned into something I had to explain. The creak near my closet was the wood contracting. The soft thump overhead was just the neighbor's cat on their roof. The faint smell of dirt when the heater kicked on was dust in the vents. Sometime near dawn, in that gray space before the alarm, I thought I heard movement again in the hallway. Not footsteps exactly, more like the soft scuff of bare feet on old wood. Just once, then silence. I stayed in bed. I didn't go check. You can call that cowardice or common sense. Since then, nothing big has happened. No flying objects. No apparitions at the foot of the bed. Just little things. The porch light turns on when the street is empty. The back door chain, once in a while, is off when I'm sure I locked it. Once every couple of weeks, I find that grayish grit on the hall floor, like dirt from a place that isn't ours. Once, Leah came home with a small bunch of flowers in her hand. For the kid, she said, meaning the grave. I don't know why. It just felt right. We walked over together and laid them down. They looked almost identical to what had been there earlier that week. As we turned to leave, I felt this odd sense that we were putting something back where it belonged. Even though we were the ones bringing something new, I've thought about moving. I check listings sometimes, late at night, scrolling through apartments with bland carpets and no view of anything older than 1970. But then, the rent numbers hit me. Or I think about packing everything up, and I close the browser. Besides, the strange thing is, I don't feel threatened. Not exactly. Watched sometimes. Not always from the cemetery side either. Sometimes it's more like the house itself is waiting for something. I still sit on the porch after work most evenings. I still look across at the stones. The broken angel, the small grave with the fresh flowers, the low brick wall that someone, once, decided was enough of a border between the living and whatever came before. And on certain nights, when the insects go suddenly quiet and the wind shifts and the air by the front door turns a degree or two colder. I find myself thinking the same thing over and over, like a line I can't quite get out of my head. The fence was never meant to keep anyone out. My name is Melissa, and I'm from Astoria, Oregon. I've lived here most of my life, except for a couple of years I spent in Portland trying to convince myself I liked city noise. I didn't. I moved back 3 years ago after my mom passed and ended up renting this little blue house on a quiet street above the river. It's nothing special. 2 bedrooms, low ceilings, old radiators that knock when they feel like it. But it's solid. The thing everybody remembers when I tell them where I live is what's across the road. Right in front of my house, on the other side of the narrow street, there's a small cemetery. It's early 1900s, mostly. The kind with weathered stones and names that sound like they belong in history books. It's not big, maybe half a block, shaped like a crooked rectangle, ringed with an iron fence that's a little rusted at the bottom, but still standing straight. There's a gravel path that goes up the middle and splits near a stone bench that faces a grave set a little apart from the others. I always thought that was a little dramatic, but in a quiet way. I don't think of it as creepy. At least I didn't. When I first moved in, it felt almost reassuring. The grass is trimmed, the stones are old, but not falling over, and someone from the city comes by a couple times a month to keep it from getting too wild. The wind comes off the river and moves through the trees, and sometimes you hear crows in the afternoon, chipmunks chattering in the brush, and then going quiet when a car passes. At night, you mostly just hear the distant horn of a ship or a train, and the occasional dog barking down the block. I live with my younger sister, Kayla. She moved in about a year after I did, when her roommate situation in Portland went bad. She likes to joke that she downgraded from drunk neighbors to dead ones. She works early mornings at a coffee shop downtown and sleeps like a rock. I work from home as a medical billing clerk for a clinic 2 towns over. I sit at a little desk near the front window that looks straight out at the cemetery. Most days, it's just a backdrop: stones, trees, the same iron gate, cars occasionally rolling past. Our routine is pretty boring. I get up around 6:30, make coffee, and listen to the radiators complain themselves awake. The screen door to the porch always creaks when I open it, and the porch light likes to flicker once before it decides to stay on or give up completely. I step out, look across at the stones, breathe the cold air, and then go back in and start on claims and codes. Kayla stumbles out later, half-dressed, grabs her coffee and says something like, "Mornin', grave girl," and then she's gone. There's a corner market 2 blocks down, family-owned. The owner, Mr. Hahn, has been there for 20 years. He always asks if the neighbors across the way are quiet. Stuff like that. People in town know about the cemetery, but they mostly just shrug it off. It's old, and it's there. The same way the river is there. My mom is buried in that cemetery. That's the main reason I took the house. I don't tell people that part first. Her grave isn't in the center or anything special. It's near the back half, where the ground dips a little, and some of the older stones lean. Her stone is one of the newer ones, white and simple, sitting among names from the early 1900s. If you walk the rows, you notice something strange, but not that strange. A lot of the death years are the same. 1918 shows up over and over. Flu, I guess. There's one family plot where 4 stones all have the same year. At first, I went out there every evening after work. I'd cross the street, the gravel crunching under my shoes, push the iron gate that squeals a little, and walk straight back to her stone. There's a bench not far from there that faces another grave, some old sailor or something, but I never used it. I'd just stand with my hands in my pockets, listening to the wind move through the trees and the low buzz of insects that always seemed louder near dusk. It was peaceful. That's the word I used. Peaceful. I liked being able to see her grave from the front window. It made me feel like I hadn't left her somewhere far away. When the light came in at a certain angle, around 7 in the summer, It lit up that back section just enough so you could pick out her stone without binoculars. For a long time, it was just life. The house, my job, my sister, the cemetery, nothing weird. The first thing that threw me off was stupid, honestly. It was a Tuesday in late September, one of those days where the air feels cooler than it looks. The sky was clear, but the wind had a bite, and you could smell wet leaves starting to rot in the gutters. I got up for coffee, glanced out the window, and saw that the cemetery gate was standing open. That wasn't unheard of. Kids sometimes cut through instead of walking around the block. But the city guys always closed it when they left, and I'd watched them the day before, mowing and trimming. They'd shut it when they drove off. I remembered that clearly because I was on a boring call and staring out the window. "Did you go over there last night?" I asked Kayla, while she stirred sugar into her cup. She shook her head. "Nope. Why? Zombies finally clocking in?" "The gate's open," I said. She shrugged. "Wind, dog, ghost, pick one." I rolled my eyes, but when she left, I kept looking at it. The trees were moving, yeah, but the gate always needed a push. It didn't just drift open. I tried to let it go. People walked through. Someone just forgot to close it. Not a big deal. Later that week, I noticed flowers on my mom's grave. That wasn't strange by itself. I'd brought flowers plenty of times, but these weren't mine. I hadn't gone over in about 4 days. I'd been buried in end-of-month billing and feeling guilty about it. The flowers were pale pink carnations, fresh, not drooping yet. There was no card. I figured maybe an old coworker of hers stopped by. Except, my mom wasn't from Astoria originally. Most of the people who knew her were hours away. I told myself I was being self-centered. Cemeteries are public. Anyone can leave flowers. Maybe someone had extras and just wanted to be kind. I didn't mention it to Kayla. She already thought I was too attached to that place. A couple evenings later, I was doing dishes while she watched something in the living room. It was around 9, and the street outside was quiet. You get used to certain sounds, distant traffic, a dog barking, a TV from somewhere. I was rinsing a plate when I heard the crunch of gravel from across the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably someone cutting through, like I said. But the footsteps didn't sound like someone walking all the way across. It was more like a few steps, pause, a few more, then nothing. The sink is right under a small window that looks sideways, not out at the cemetery. You have to go to the living room to get the full view. I wiped my hands and walked over. Kayla glanced up from the couch. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thought I heard something," I said. I parted the curtains and looked out. The porch light across the street by the maintenance shed was on, throwing a yellow pool on the gravel path inside the gate. The gate itself was closed. I didn't see anyone. Just the stones, the iron fence, trees moving in the wind. It was colder that night. You could see your own breath if you stepped outside. The insects were quieter. Every now and then, a car would pass at the bottom of the hill, but up here, it felt like the town had gone to sleep. I told myself I'd probably just heard our own walkway. The memory of the sound changed in my head as I stood there, like it shifted from one side of the street to the other. Brains do that. It bothered me more than it should have, though. I went back to the kitchen, but I didn't turn the radio on like I usually do. I just listened. Over the next week, little things stacked up. The gate would be open in the morning, then closed by afternoon, and I wouldn't see anyone go in or out. The flowers on my mom's grave changed. The carnations wilted and disappeared. Then a single white rose appeared, stuck into the ground at the base of the stone. A few days after that, there were daisies. I never saw anyone placing them, and I look out that window a lot. That's my main view during the day. Gravel path, bench, that one grave the bench faces, and my mom's stone off a little to the left of all that. "Hey, grave girl," Kayla said one night while we ate takeout at the little dining table. "Did you leave more flowers out there?" I didn't even pretend not to know what she meant. Not this time. She raised her eyebrows. Creepy secret admirer for Mom? Very funny. I'm serious, she said, grinning. Maybe it's like some old boyfriend. Comes at night with a single rose, stands dramatically in the fog. There's no fog, I said, even though sometimes there was in the early morning. She shrugged. Yet. A couple of days later, at the market, I asked Mr. Han about the cemetery. It wasn't a big interrogation. It was just something I slipped in while I bought milk and cereal. Hey, do you know who takes care of the flowers over there? I asked, pointing my chin toward the street. The city mostly, he said. Volunteers on Memorial Day. Why? Someone's been leaving flowers on my mom's grave, I said. I just thought maybe it was part of some program, I don't know. He frowned a little. They don't do that, no, just maintenance. Maybe family, friend. She didn't have many here, I said. He gave one of those polite, tight-lipped smiles people do when they hit the edge of someone's grief. Well, people do kind things. Maybe don't question it too much, huh? He said it lightly, but he didn't meet my eyes when he handed me my change. Around that time, the sounds started at night. Our house is old. It creaks, the wood settles. The radiators knock and hiss. I'm used to those sounds. I always have been. These were different. I'd be in bed, almost asleep, and I'd hear the screen door give its little squeak, like someone had opened it slowly and let it swing shut. Then, a few seconds later, the soft thump of the front door. The first time I heard it, I thought Kayla had come home late and forgotten to text. I glanced at my phone. It was almost midnight. I got up, padded down the hall, and saw a sliver of light under her door. I tapped. Kay, I whispered. She opened the door right away, sleepy and annoyed, in an oversized t-shirt. What? You just came in? I asked. I've been in bed for like an hour, she said. What's wrong with you? I listened. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no voices. Just the fridge humming and the wind outside brushing against the siding. Nothing, I said. Never mind, go back to sleep. After that, I started checking the front door before bed. I'd lock it, test it, make sure the deadbolt was turned all the way. I'd lock the screen too, even though that always felt paranoid. Some nights I'd hear the screen door anyway, that same creak and slap. Some nights I wouldn't. I never found it open in the morning. The air in the house felt different sometimes. That's a weird thing to say, but it did. I'd be sitting on the couch with a blanket and suddenly get a chill, like someone had opened a window behind me. The hairs on my arms would stand up. When I checked, all the windows were shut. The thermostat still read the same. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to make me rub my hands together and feel stupid. One Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning. The kind of cleaning you do when your brain is restless, vacuuming under furniture, wiping baseboards, all that. Kayla was at work. The house was quiet except for the vacuum and the occasional car passing outside. The sun came through the front windows, lighting up dust in the air. I pushed the vacuum toward the front door and saw something on the floor just inside. There were faint marks on the hardwood, little smudges, darker than the rest, leading from the door toward the hallway. You could miss them easily if you weren't looking. At first, I thought it was just shadows. When I got closer, I realized it was dried mud. Thin, partial footprints, like someone had stepped inside with damp shoes, then wiped most of it away. That might not sound like much, but we're pretty careful about shoes. It rains here a lot, and we're not trying to ruin the floors. There's a rug and a little shoe rack right inside the door. If Kayla came in muddy, there'd be clumps, not these faint streaks. And I had been home all morning. I would have heard the door. I stood there with the vacuum humming in my hand, looking at those marks, and I had this stupid thought. Cemetery dirt. It popped into my head before I could stop it. The color was right, kind of dark and fine. I crouched down and touched it. It was dry, gritty between my fingers. I cleaned it up. I didn't say anything to Kayla. It felt ridiculous, like I was trying to spook myself on purpose. That night, though, I dreamed about my mom for the first time in months. She was standing across the street, inside the cemetery gate, wearing the blue jacket she always wore to my school events. She had her hands in her pockets and was looking straight at the house, not at me. I tried to call to her, but my voice wouldn't come out. Classic dream stuff. When I woke up, my heart was pounding. And for a second, I didn't know if I'd actually heard myself call her name. I tried to shake it off as grief. That was the easiest explanation. Grief is messy, and it leaks into everything. A few days later, I was working at my desk when I saw someone in the cemetery. That wasn't unusual. People visit sometimes. But this person was near the back, by my mom's section. I glanced up once, saw a figure between the stones, and went back to my screen. After a minute or two, I realized something about the posture felt familiar. Whoever it was had their hands in their pockets, shoulders a little hunched, like they were cold but trying not to show it. That was exactly how my mom stood when she waited in line, or watched something, or talked to neighbors on our old street. I told myself I was being emotional, but I kept looking up, my eyes flicking from the laptop to the window and back. The figure moved slowly along the row, pausing at certain stones. I couldn't see the face clearly from that distance, just dark hair pulled back and that stance. I don't know why I got up, I just did. I walked to the door, put on my shoes, and went out onto the porch. The screen door creaked loud in the quiet. The air was cool, and I could smell the river, a mix of salt and something metallic. Across the street, the figure hadn't moved much. They were standing near my mom's grave now. I crossed the road. The gravel under my shoes sounded too loud. I pushed the gate open. It groaned a little, and that finally made the person turn. It wasn't my mom, obviously. It was a woman, maybe in her 50s, in a dark jacket, holding a small bunch of wildflowers. She looked surprised to see me. "Oh," she said. "Sorry, am I in your way?" "No, not at all," I said, feeling stupid. I live across the street. My mom's buried here. I thought maybe..." I trailed off because there was no good way to finish that sentence. The woman nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "This is her stone, right?" She gestured down at my mom's grave. The wildflowers were in her hand, not in the ground, but there were already small blooms at the base of the stone. "You knew her?" I asked. She hesitated. I saw it, that tiny pause people have when they decide how much to say. "Not really," she said. "I knew of her. She was kind to my sister when they worked at the nursing home together, years back. I don't know. I like to look after some of the graves people don't visit often." "She is visited," I said, maybe too quickly. "By me. I live right there." The woman glanced at the house, then back at me. Her face softened. "Of course," she said. "I didn't mean anything by it." She bent down and set the flowers beside the others. "I'll stay away from this one then." "You don't have to," I said. I felt embarrassed. "It's fine. I just didn't know who kept leaving them." She straightened up. "Sometimes it's easier not to know those things," she said quietly. I didn't really understand that, but I nodded like I did. We made small talk for a minute. Her name was Carol. Her sister had died a long time ago. She liked walking the cemetery during the day because it was less hectic than the rest of town. Normal stuff. Before she left, she pointed toward the front section, near the bench that faced that one slightly separated grave. "That one always gets flowers," she said. "Every week, almost. People think the city does it, but they don't. Nobody knows who does. Funny, huh?" I looked where she was pointing. I'd seen that grave a million times, just never paid attention. The stone was older than my mom's, older than most, but not the oldest. Early 1900s, like I said. The name on it was worn, but still readable. I didn't think much about it then. That night, Kayla and I ate dinner on the couch, watching some show she liked. During a quiet part, she muted it and turned to me. "You keep staring out the window," she said. "You know that, right?" "I'm just thinking," I said. "About Mom?" "Yeah, and the flowers, and..." I trailed off. "Do you ever feel like the house is colder than it should be?" She snorted. "You mean like haunted cold?" "I mean drafty," I said, annoyed. "Like there's air moving when there shouldn't be." She thought about it. "Sometimes," she said. "But it's an old house. Relax. If anything weird comes over from the cemetery, I nominate you to deal with it." We laughed. It sounded mostly normal. A few nights later, I woke up to someone saying my name. It was soft, the way my mom used to wake me up on school mornings. Melissa. Not the sharp way people say it when they're mad. Just my name, gentle, right next to my ear. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The only light was a glow from the street lamp outside, slipping through the blinds. My heart was pounding, but the house was quiet. No footsteps, no door sounds, just the faint whoosh of wind and a dog barking far away, then stopping. I told myself I must have dreamed it. People hear their names in dreams all the time. Still, I got up, opened my door, and listened. The wood under my feet was cold. Kayla's door was closed. There was a strip of light under it. It looked like she'd fallen asleep with the lamp on again. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed something by the front door. The hall light was off, but we get enough spill from the living room that you can make things out. There was a shape on the floor, right up against the door. A darker patch. I flipped the switch. The overhead light flickered once and came on. There was a little pile of dried leaves and dirt, like someone had shaken out their shoes just inside. Mixed in with it was something white and crumpled. I walked over and picked it up. It was a flower, or what was left of one. A white daisy, crushed and browned at the edges, like it had been pressed under a shoe and then scraped along the floor. I checked the locks. The deadbolt was still turned. The chain was in place. The screen door latch was hooked. I checked them twice, timid, my fingers shaking a little. The next day, I called the landlord about drafts. I made it about heat loss, about the gas bill. He sent a handyman over. The guy checked the windows, the doors, the seals. He tightened a hinge on the screen door and said, "Yeah, these old frames shift. You're gonna get some air. It's normal." He didn't find any gaps big enough for a person. I didn't ask him to, obviously. That would have sounded crazy. On his way out, he paused on the porch and looked across at the cemetery. "You know about this place?" he asked. "I know it's old," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "Nothing. We just used to dare each other to run through there at night when I was a kid, back before they put the new houses in. There weren't as many graves then." "What do you mean?" I asked. He scratched his cheek. "I mean, they added stones later. Family plots, I guess. Folks get moved. Records get weird. Small town stuff." "Moved from where?" I asked. He shrugged again. "Dunno. My grandma said some of the names didn't match the bodies. I think she was just trying to scare us. Don't worry about it." He said it like a joke, but I noticed he didn't look at the grave the bench faced. He looked at the ground instead. That bothered me more than it should have. After he left, I went back to my desk, but I didn't work. I just sat there, staring out at the stones. The wind was picking up. You could see it in the way the trees moved, the way plastic flowers on some graves trembled. I pulled up the county records site on my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I searched my mom's name, the cemetery parcel, burial permits. A lot of the scanned documents were old and hard to read. Handwriting, faded ink, that kind of thing. I did find something though. It was a list of burials by section, typed up sometime in the 1970s. A neat grid of names and dates. Next to my mom's name, under location, someone had written a little note, adjacent to existing family plot. That threw me. We don't have family here, not going back generations. My grandparents were from the Midwest. My mom moved here for a job when she was in her 20s. There shouldn't have been an existing family plot. I scrolled up the list, looking for our last name. Halfway down the page, in that front section near the bench, there it was. Same last name, different first. Date of death, 1918. Age, 9. I stared at it for a long time. My eyes started to hurt. 9 years old, same surname as mine, same spelling. I didn't recognize the first name, but that didn't mean anything. People reuse names, families move, coincidences happen. I told myself all of that, over and over. That night, Kayla worked a double shift. I was alone in the house. The wind picked up after dark, making the branches scrape against the roof. The radiator in the living room knocked like someone tapping on metal pipes. The porch light flickered and finally gave up, leaving the front of the house darker than usual. I tried to watch TV, but I kept turning the volume down because I thought I heard something underneath it. A soft crunch, a creak, a sigh. It might have been nothing. I don't know. Around 10, I muted the TV completely and just listened. The insects outside had gone quiet. The only sound was the wind, and every now and then, a car far away. I sat there for a long time, staring at the front door. I don't know how long I waited before it happened. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. The screen door creaked, just once, like someone was easing it open. Then I heard the faintest scrape of metal on metal, like the hook of the latch gently moving. The front doorknob didn't turn. The deadbolt didn't rattle. Nothing swung open. But the air in the room shifted. It felt colder, heavier. I could see my breath, just barely, in the blue light from the TV. "Hello?" I said, even though I knew how that sounded. Nothing answered. No voice, no footsteps. I stood up anyway. My legs felt rubbery. I walked to the door, put my hand on the knob, and held it there. It was cold, but not ice cold. Just cool metal. I didn't open it. I don't know why. Something in me decided that if whoever, or whatever, wanted in, it would have to come through on its own. Nothing did. After a minute, I took my hand away and turned around. That's when I noticed the picture frames on the entryway table. 2 of them were tilted forward, like someone had bumped the table on their way past. One was the last photo I'd taken with my mom, right before she got sick. The other was a picture of me and Kayla as kids, standing in front of our old house. I hadn't touched those frames in days. I fixed them and went to bed with my heart beating too fast, telling myself the vibrations from the wind or the radiators had shifted them. That was all. A few nights later, I saw her. I was at my desk, finishing up a late claim. It was close to midnight. The house was quiet. Kayla was staying at a friend's place after a party. I was the only one home. Outside, the cemetery was lit only by the street lamp at the corner, and a faint glow from a house down the hill. I looked up for a second to rest my eyes, and that's when I saw the figure by my mom's grave. She was standing still, facing the stone. Dark hair pulled back, hands in her pockets. That familiar stance. My brain supplied Mom before I could stop it. Just like with the woman earlier. This time, though, the distance and the dark made it worse. I couldn't see her face at all, just a silhouette. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing. The figure didn't move. The wind made the trees sway, but she stayed solid. I realized my hands were shaking. I knew, logically, this couldn't be her. I knew that, but grief doesn't care about logic. It presses on the tender spots whenever it wants. I stood up, walked to the front door, put my shoes on, and opened the screen. The air outside was very still, colder than it had been an hour before. The insects were silent. No dogs, no cars. Just a distant church bell ringing the quarter hour somewhere across town. I crossed the street slowly, never taking my eyes off that spot. As I got closer to the gate, the figure finally shifted. She turned slightly, like she'd heard me. I felt my throat close. I pushed the gate open. It squealed. I stepped in. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I walked straight down the path, past the bench, toward the back. With every step, the shape in the dark resolved a little more. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. When I reached the row where my mom's grave sits, I stopped. The space in front of her stone was empty. There was no one there. No movement, no footsteps. Just the stone, groaned. The grass, and a small bunch of fresh flowers at the base. Wildflowers, the kind Carol had brought that first time. I looked around. There was nowhere to hide nearby. The nearest big tree was several yards away. The ground was soft, but not muddy. There were no footprints except mine. I stood there for a long time, feeling stupid, feeling scared, feeling both at once. Eventually, I knelt down and touched the flowers. The stems were damp and cool. They couldn't have been there long. On my way back toward the gate, I passed the front section. I don't know why I stopped at that one grave, the one the bench faces. Maybe because of what Carol said, or the note in the records. Either way, I found myself standing in front of it, tracing the worn letters with my eyes. The surname was the same as mine, no question. The first name sank in slowly. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Kayla's. It was my mom's, spelled exactly the same. Date of death, 1918. Age, 9. I felt this weird, hollow feeling in my chest. It was like standing on a step you thought was there and finding empty air. It was just a name. That's what I told myself. Just a coincidence. Families reuse names all the time. Records get messy. Stones get added later. The handyman had said that. My mom's parents never mentioned any relatives out here, but that didn't mean there weren't any. I stood there until my fingers went numb from the cold. Eventually, I went back to the house, locked the doors, and sat on the couch in the dark, listening to every small sound. I didn't tell Kayla about seeing the figure. I didn't tell her about the old grave with Mom's name. I started sleeping with my door half open, though, which she noticed. "You okay?" she asked one morning, pouring coffee. "Yeah," I said. "Just been having weird dreams." "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "Staring at the cemetery like it's going to answer a question you're too scared to ask out loud." She wasn't wrong. I went back to the county site a few days later. I tried to find more about that old grave. The page for it was a mess, scanned notes, half-erased penciled comments. In one corner, in small handwriting, I saw a line someone had written decades ago. "Burial uncertain, stone placed after records lost." I leaned back and stared at that sentence. Burial uncertain. I don't know what that means, not really. Maybe the body's there, maybe it's not. Maybe the stone belongs to someone in a family who couldn't afford a plot at the time. Maybe they just needed a place to put a name. I still work at the same desk, looking out the same window. I still hear the screen door creak some nights when there's no wind. Sometimes I wake up with the sense that someone just walked past my bedroom door. Sometimes I find a bit of dirt by the entryway, or a petal from a flower I didn't buy. I visit my mom's grave less now. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know which name I'm talking to anymore. The one I knew, or the one on that worn stone out front. I haven't seen the figure again, not clearly. Sometimes, late at night, I catch a shape by the bench or near the back, and when I blink, it's gone. I tell myself it's just shadows and headlights. Most days, I believe that. I've never asked the clerk at the market or the handyman or Carol about the old grave with my mom's name. I don't really want to hear their theories. I don't want to know whether anyone else has seen someone standing at our door. So I just watch. I keep going with my routine. Claims, coffee, creaking doors, knocking radiators. And every few days, when I look across the street, I see something small and bright that I didn't put there. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Melissa, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I always feel like I have to start there because people hear what I'm about to say, and they picture some creaky old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, or one of those storybook New England towns with fog and lighthouses. Stillwater's not like that. It's just a small river town with tourists on the weekends, kids on bikes, and too many coffee shops for how many people actually live there. I rent a little 2-bedroom house on a quiet street a few blocks back from the river. White siding, peeling in spots, front steps that tilt a bit to the left, maple tree out front that dumps a ridiculous amount of leaves every fall. The kind of place you barely notice when you drive past. Across the narrow street from my house, there's a cemetery. If you're picturing rows and rows of stones stretching forever, that's not it. This one's compact, pocket-sized almost. A little rectangle of ground, maybe half a block wide, boxed in by a low brick wall that comes up to my thigh. You could hop over it without even thinking. There's a gap where a gate probably used to be, just 2 brick columns and a worn path of old gravel. The stones start neat and lined up near the front, then get crooked and tangled the further back you look, like someone got tired of trying to keep order and just started sticking them wherever there was space. It's old too, Victorian era, from the dates I've bothered to read when I walk by. 1880-something, 1890-something. Lots of carved flowers and crosses and beloved mother, and gone but not forgotten. Some of the names are worn down so smooth you can only see the grooves if the light hits just right. Ivy has chewed up the cornerstones in the back, and the grass beyond the first few rows gets high and patchy, with clover and little scrubby bushes trying to take over. Near the front, there's clear effort, short grass. Someone's been there with a trimmer. Past the middle, the ground dips and swells in soft little hollows, and it feels like you're walking on something that wants you to step carefully. There's one grave that sits apart from the rest. It's not obvious from the street. You notice it once you've been looking at the place for a while. The main rows are all tight together, shoulder to shoulder, and then off to the right, near the back where the wall bows out a little, there's a single stone with a good few feet of space all around it, like the others decided not to get too close. In front of that stone, facing it directly, there's an old stone bench. It's not fancy, just a slab set on 2 rough supports, but it's the only bench inside the wall. From my living room window, if I angle my chair right, I can see that bench almost perfectly. I live there with my cousin Erin. She moved up from Iowa a year ago when she got a job at one of the breweries in town. And rent being what it is, we decided to split a place. She tells people we live across from a graveyard, like it's the punchline to a joke, then waits for them to react. Best neighbors you'll ever have, she always says. Quiet, never complain about the noise. She thinks she's hilarious. I work from home as a medical billing clerk for a clinic in St. Paul. That sounds fancier than it is. Mostly it's me in leggings at the dining table, staring at codes and insurance claims on a laptop, sending emails, and being on hold with people who sound as tired as I am. My days are pretty predictable. I get up around 6, make coffee, sit on the front steps if the weather's not awful, and scroll through my phone while the neighborhood slowly wakes up. There's a dog walker who comes by around the same time every morning. Little group of dogs trailing behind her, leashes tangling, leaving little dark spots on the grass near the brick wall. Now and then, an older couple walks through the cemetery itself, taking a shortcut to the next street. They never look at the stones. They just follow the gravel path straight through, heads down. At first, the cemetery was just part of the backdrop. When I moved in, the landlord apologized for it. Some people don't like being across from that, he said, like he was trying to guess if I was superstitious. I just shrugged. I've been around hospitals enough to know the living are more complicated than the dead. Besides, in summer, the trees around the wall are full and green, and there's this soft, steady rustling when the wind moves through them. In the evenings, I'd sit on the front porch and listen to leaves scraping lightly against each other, and the stones would catch the last light in this dull, sleepy way. Peaceful. The house itself is normal. Wood floors that creak in the hallway. Baseboard heaters that click when they come on. A screen door that always seems to slam harder than you expect. The fridge hums too loud. The plumbing makes a hollow rushing sound when someone takes a shower. Sometimes a train goes by on the other side of town, and you hear this faint horn, almost like someone blowing into a bottle. And we have one of those motion sensor porch lights that came with the place. Cheap, yellowish, likes to flicker a little when it first snaps on. Most nights, Aaron gets home from the brewery around 10 or 11, smelling like hops and yeast. And we'll sit on the couch for a while, talk about our days, maybe watch something stupid. If we're too tired, we just do our own thing. I go to bed early. She stays up late scrolling. We're not kids. There's no party vibe. It's a quiet life. The first weird thing was so small, I wouldn't have remembered it if everything else hadn't happened. It was mid-September, still warm during the day, but cool in the mornings. I stepped outside with my coffee, barefoot, and saw the gap where the cemetery gate should be standing wide open. Now, I know there's no actual gate there, just the 2 brick posts and that worn strip of gravel. But I swear, for half a second, my brain filled it in. Black iron bars swung inward, open like somebody had just walked through. I even caught myself stepping around the empty space like I didn't want the imaginary gate to close on me. Then I realized I was being stupid and laughed at myself. I blamed it on not having had enough coffee. A couple days later, I noticed flowers on the grave that sits by itself. I'd never seen anything on that stone before. People leave things on the ones in the front rows. Plastic crosses, faded wreaths, a little stuffed bear that's been there so long, one ear is sun-bleached white. But that lone stone in the back had always been bare. This time, there was a small glass jar, the kind you'd use for jam, and someone had stuck 3 fresh daisies in it. I remember thinking it was sweet. Somebody out there still remembered whoever that was. The jar caught the morning light and threw this tiny, almost invisible glint across the brick. A breeze moved and the daisies nodded a little, the petals brushing the stone. It barely registered as unusual. Cemeteries are for flowers, after all. That evening, Erin came home while I was still at the table with my laptop. She dropped her bag and went straight to the front window. "Your boyfriend brought you flowers," she said. I looked up. "What?" She jerked her chin toward the grave. "Over there. Every girl wants a man who's consistent from beyond the grave, right?" I rolled my eyes. "You're ridiculous. I'm just saying, if a guy can keep putting flowers on your grave that far out in the back, that's commitment." She laughed, then wandered to the kitchen. "You think that one's like the troublemaker of the graveyard? Put him away from the others so they can rest in peace." It was just a joke. I laughed too. That's how it all was at first. Little comments, nothing that stuck. The motion light started going off more often around then. It's trained mostly on our front steps and the patch of sidewalk in front of the house, but it spills a bit onto the road and the brick wall opposite. At first, I figured it was raccoons or stray cats. I'd be in bed and see the faint glow through my curtains, then hear the quick patter of small feet on concrete. But some nights, the light clicked on and stayed on, and I didn't hear anything, just that buzzing hum it makes when it's fully lit. One night, around 2, I woke up for no obvious reason. I lay there listening and realized the house was too quiet. No fridge hum, no heater, no occasional car going by. Even the usual distant train wasn't there. It felt like someone had turned the sound down on the whole town. Then I saw a little strip of light at the bottom of my door. The motion light had come on outside. I got up, not really scared, just annoyed. I figured it was a possum or something, and I didn't want it knocking over the trash again. The floor was cold, even though the day had been warm. I walked down the hallway, the boards creaking under my feet louder than they should have in all that silence. The screen door rattled a little in a breeze I couldn't hear. When I looked through the window, the porch light was shining straight out on the street, painting the low brick wall in that pale yellow. The cemetery beyond was just darkness and shapes. I couldn't see any animals, no cars. The maple tree's leaves weren't moving. What I did hear, faintly, was gravel crunching. Slow, even steps, like somebody walking on the path between the stones. It's funny how your brain tries to make things normal. My first thought wasn't ghost or anything like that. It was that maybe one of the neighbors had cut through the cemetery late and was heading home. People do that. The cemetery connects our street to the next one over. I couldn't see anyone though, and the sound didn't move the way real footsteps do. It didn't get closer or farther away. It was just there, like someone was pacing in place. I went back to bed. I remember thinking, if I just lie down and close my eyes, in the morning this will be nothing. And for a while, that worked. The flowers on the separated grave kept changing. First daisies, then a little bunch of wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked from the side of the road. Purple clover, Queen Anne's lace, something yellow I didn't know the name of. Always in the same small jar. I never saw anyone put them there. I'd leave for groceries and come back, and they'd be different. I work from home. I'm at that window a lot. It bothered me a little that I never caught whoever was doing it. I mentioned it to the woman at the corner store one day when I stopped for milk. She's one of those people who knows everything about everyone. "You know who keeps that grave decorated?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She froze for the tiniest second, just a hitch in the way she reached for the receipt paper. "Which one?" "The one in the back, off to the side, with the bench." Her mouth tightened, not angry, just like she'd bitten down on something sour. "Oh, that corner. Well, there are still a few families in town who look after their people," she said. "Some things go way back." Then she slid the receipt toward me and changed the subject so fast it was clumsy. "You try the new coffee place on Main yet? My niece says it's good." It was weird, but again, I let it go. Small town people are private about certain things. Old deaths, old scandals. I figured maybe whoever was buried there went out in some ugly way, and they didn't like gossip. Around October, the disturbances stopped being so easy to explain away. The motion light came on 3 nights in a row at exactly 3:17 a.m. The first night, I didn't check the time. I just squinted at the glare under my curtains and went back to sleep. The second night, I checked my phone and happened to see the digits. The third night, I woke up already looking at the clock on my nightstand, like I knew what I was supposed to see. 3:17. Then, a heartbeat later, the light clicked on outside and flooded my room with that thin, dull yellow around the edges of the shade. I mentioned it to Aaron over breakfast. "Our porch light has a sense of drama," I said, trying to joke. 3 nights in a row at exactly the same time. She spooned yogurt into her mouth and shrugged. "Probably a bat circling around. They've got weird patterns. Or your boyfriend from the cemeteries on a schedule." "You and that joke," I said. But something about it made my skin crawl a little that time. That afternoon, between claims, I opened another tab and searched for cemetery records for Stillwater. There's a PDF on the city website with plots listed, sections and numbers. I scrolled through until I found our street. The little cemetery didn't have an official name, just Block 12 Burial Ground. The rows were labeled A through F. I traced the layout in my head: front row, middle, back. There was a rough map on the last page. Most of the graves were marked with names and dates. Some were just unknown. The cluster off to the right in the back was there, but when I looked for the single grave that's set apart, I couldn't find it. There was a gap on the diagram where it should have been, just an empty space in the list. Section F, plot numbers jumped from 27 to 29. No 28. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. Maybe it was a scanning error. Maybe my sense of where the grave was wasn't accurate. The map was old. You could tell by the way the ink had faded in spots. It could easily have missed a stone or two, but once I saw that blank space, I couldn't unsee it. That night, I sat on the front steps a little later than usual, hoodie pulled up, hands around a mug of tea. The air had that thin chill that creeps under your sleeves. Cars passed occasionally, headlights sliding across the stones, turning names into bright slashes, then letting them sink back into shadow. The porch light flicked on when I shifted and lifted my mug. I watched the bench. It's funny. You'd think an empty bench wouldn't feel like anything. It's just stone. But under that light, the seat looked slightly darker in the middle, the way it does after someone stood up, like the remaining body heat had changed the color for a second. I knew that made no sense. Rock doesn't do that. Still, my brain handed me that explanation and waited for me to accept it. The wind picked up and stirred the leaves in the maple tree. Across the street, though, the trees around the cemetery wall stayed still. No rustling, no movement, just their dark shapes against the sky. The difference was noticeable. I heard the gravel again. 1, 2, 3 steps. Pause. 1, 2. It was so soft that if I hadn't already been listening, I might have missed it. I told myself it was just someone cutting through. I held on to that until my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Erin, texting from work. "We're slammed, might be late, don't wait up." There went the idea that she was out there messing with me. A few days later, the line between over there and over here started to blur. It had rained all morning, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the street into a dull mirror. The dirt along the base of the brick wall had turned to a pale, tacky mud. I worked through lunch, trying to clear a backlog, and didn't notice the rain stopping. Around 3, I got up to stretch and refill my water. On the way to the kitchen, I passed the front door and saw something dark on the mat. There were footprints. They weren't dramatic, like in a movie. Just a few faint marks, but clear enough. The kind you get when someone steps out of wet ground and onto dry concrete. Darker patches in the shape of a heel, then the ball of the foot, then toes if you look close. They went from the outside edge of the porch straight up to the door, stopped there, and didn't go back. The spacing looked like an adult's stride. I opened the door and looked out. The porch steps were dry except for those prints. The street was mostly dry now, too. The water gathered in shallow dips by the curb. Across from us, in front of the cemetery wall, the mud was churned up in a couple places, like someone had been standing there for a while, shifting their weight. I checked the time. Middle of the afternoon. If it had been a delivery driver, there would have been a package. No one had knocked. Erin wasn't home. The neighbors' cars were all in their usual spots. Nobody seemed to be out. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. I could hear a lawnmower somewhere blocks away, a dog barking twice and then going quiet. A crow called from the direction of the river. Little normal sounds, nothing near the porch, but my heart was beating way too fast for how ordinary it all looked. I told myself it was just some kid cutting across our porch to get out of the rain. Maybe they'd changed their mind and gone the other way. I got a rag and wiped the prints up. The whole time, I kept glancing across the street at that bench and that single grave. The jar was there again, this time with red flowers. They looked almost too bright for the gray afternoon. That night, I dreamed someone was standing at the foot of my bed. When I woke up, there was no one there, obviously, but the feeling clung to me like static. I could smell damp earth, that cold, mineral scent you get when you dig up a plant. For a minute, I thought maybe the windows were open, but they weren't. The room was sealed tight, the heater knocking softly in the corner. A few evenings after that, I heard Erin call my name from the kitchen while I was in the hallway. "Mel?" "Yeah," I said. No answer. I walked into the kitchen. The light was on. The window over the sink was closed, The back door was shut. Her keys weren't on the hook by the door, which meant she wasn't home yet. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. When she did come in, half an hour later, I asked if she'd called me earlier, maybe from outside. She frowned. No, why? Nothing, I said. I think I just misheard the TV. We hadn't had the TV on. By the time the leaves started to really fall, I'd gotten into the habit of keeping curtains half closed after dark. It wasn't like me. I used to like seeing the streetlights through the windows, little moving shapes of cars. But now, the reflection of the room on the glass made it too easy for my brain to imagine someone standing just beyond it, looking in. One Saturday, it was bugging me enough that I decided to go down to the city office and ask about the missing plot on the map. It felt like a tangible thing I could solve, unlike undefined footsteps and phantom voices. The clerk on duty was an older man with a friendly face and a name tag that said Ron. The lobby smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Block 12, he said, when I gave him the info. "Oh yeah, the little one over on Birch. You're living over there." "Across the street," I said. I was just curious. There's a grave kind of off by itself. I was looking at the online map, and it seemed like there was a number missing. I tried to sound like someone mildly interested in local history, nothing more. He laughed once, short and without much humor. "That map's old, a lot of holes in it. Do you have a more updated version?" He hesitated, then turned to a filing cabinet. The drawer screeched a little as he pulled it out. He flipped through folders until he found one labeled Block 12. Inside, there was a paper map, edges yellowed, covered in neat handwriting in black ink. He spread it on the counter between us. I leaned in. The layout matched the one I'd seen online. Rows, sections, numbers. There, in the back right, was that gap again. 27, then a blank space, then 29. "What about that one?" I asked, pointing. Ron scratched his cheek. "Admin thing," he said. "Sometimes plots get reserved and then never used, that kind of thing." "There's a stone there," I said. "Like a real one, not just grass." He went quiet. His finger tapped the edge of the map 3 times. "Well," he said finally, "records from that era aren't perfect. People got buried where they could. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" He folded the map back up instead of answering. "You know, not every stone over there lines up tidy with the paperwork. Some got moved, some never got written down right. It was a different time. If you're really interested, the Historical Society might have more to say." His tone made it clear he didn't want to say anything else. He slid the folder back into the drawer with a thump. That night, I woke up to the sound of the screen door creaking open. Not the usual slam, not the rattle in the wind. The slow, complaining hinge sound it makes if you pull it gently. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. The house was dark except for the clock's red glow. I heard the soft click of the latch on the front door. Just the smallest sound of metal touching metal. The motion light flicked on, its faint hum seeping through the walls. Every instinct I had told me to stay in bed. But habits are strong, and I've always been more stubborn than smart. I got up, grabbed my phone, and padded down the hall. The boards under my feet seemed to know I was trying to be quiet, responding with long, low creaks instead of sharp ones. When I reached the front door, I saw that the deadbolt was still turned. The chain was hooked. The door itself was closed. But the screen door was hanging half open, visible through the small glass pane, moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel, as if someone had just stepped through it and let it swing back. The porch light shone out across the steps, over the street, right onto the brick wall and the first row of stones. I could see part of the bench too. Someone was sitting there. At least, that's what my brain told me at first. A darker shape against the darker background. The impression of a person hunched slightly forward. I blinked, and the shape resolved into the shadow of the maple tree's branches, stretched and warped by the angle of the light. I told myself that's all it had ever been. I kept telling myself that while my heart hammered in my throat. Behind the glass, in the thin strip of reflection, I saw movement. It looked like someone walking down the hallway behind me. Just a flicker, a suggestion. I turned around, but the hall was empty. Erin shifted in her room, her bed springs complaining once, then settling. I thought about knocking on her door, saying, "Hey, do you hear any of this?" But there was something about dragging it into the open that felt worse than keeping it to myself. Over the next week, small things were off. A chair pulled out from the table when I knew I'd pushed it in. A picture frame slightly tilted when I hadn't dusted. My keys not on the hook where I always hung them, but on the little table by the window facing the cemetery. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make me pause. One afternoon, while Erin was at work, I was going through a folder of old paperwork the landlord had left in a kitchen drawer. Appliance manuals, boring stuff like that. At the bottom were older documents, photocopies of a property survey, a couple of handwritten notes about repairs. One page was a list of previous owners, dates scribbled next to names. Another was a photocopy of what looked like a very old deed. The scanned paper was faint, but I could make out some of it. The lot number, the street, the year. 1892. There was a line that said, in shaky script, "House and adjoining burial plot to be kept together so long as family remains." Our property isn't that big. There's no adjoining plot on our side of the street. The only place that description made sense was across the road, where that single grave sits apart from the others, with the bench facing it. Facing, I realized, not just the stone, but directly toward our front windows. My last name isn't on that stone. I checked the next morning. I walked across, pretending I was just out for a casual stroll. I stepped over the low brick wall, feeling weirdly like I was doing something I wasn't supposed to do, even though there was no sign saying I couldn't. The grass was damp and cold. Through my sneakers. Up close, the stone was more worn than it looked from the house. Lichen had eaten away at the lower half, covering the dates. The first name was there though, still clear, Martha. The last name was smudged at the edges, but readable if you squinted. Not mine, not Erin's. The jar at the base held wilted red flowers. They smelled faintly sour, like they were starting to rot. I stood there longer than I meant to, feeling the air change. It wasn't colder, exactly. Just closer, heavier, as if the sound around me had gone a little flat. Even the cicadas in the trees had quieted down. The bench was a few feet away, back to the wall, facing me. There were shallow scuff marks on the ground in front of it, like the toes of someone's shoes had been digging in while they sat. Something about the angle made me picture sitting there, day after day, looking across the street at the house, watching people come and go, watching the windows, waiting. A car drove by behind me on the street, tires hissing on the pavement, and the spell broke. I stepped back over the wall and went home, telling myself I was being dramatic. That evening, Erin and I were on the couch. She'd kicked off her shoes. They were lying jumbled by the door. The TV was on low, some home renovation show humming in the background. Outside, the porch light clicked on, then flicked off, then on again, like it couldn't decide. "You ever get weirded out by that place?" I asked, nodding toward the window. She shrugged. "Sometimes. Like if I see someone in there after dark. But I figure if they're visiting somebody, that's their business, you know?" "What about late? Like 3 a.m. late?" She snorted. "If I see someone in there at 3, I'm not looking twice. Inside curtains, under blanket, not my problem." I hesitated. "Have you ever heard someone say your name when you were alone?" She turned and looked at me more carefully. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired, I guess." She considered me for a second. "You want me to stop with the graveyard jokes?" I laughed, but it came out thin. Maybe tone them down a little. Done, she said. For real. If it's freaking you out, I'll chill. That night, I slept with my door half open. I don't know why that felt safer. I lay on my side, facing the hallway, watching the faint strip of light from the digital clock bleed across the floorboards. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up to the sound of someone walking down the hall. The boards creaked in that slow, familiar way. A shape passed the doorway, just the sense of something darker than the dark around it. "Aaron?" I whispered. The steps stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then I heard my own voice, or something like it, speaking from the front room. Not words I could make out, just murmur, the rise and fall of my cadence. I heard a second voice answer, softer. The tone close enough to Aaron's that my brain tried to label it as her. They talked like that for maybe 30 seconds, low and steady, like two people having a late, quiet conversation. I sat up, heart pounding against my ribs. "Hello?" I called, louder. The house fell silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I got out of bed, hands shaking more from adrenaline than fear, or at least that's what I told myself. I walked down the hall. The living room light was off. The couch was empty. The TV remote sat where we'd left it. The front door was closed, deadbolt turned. I went to Erin's room. The door was closed. I knocked, then opened it a crack. She was sprawled on her stomach, one arm hanging off the bed, mouth slightly open, dead asleep. I could hear the slow, heavy pull of her breathing. I didn't wake her. I don't know why. Some part of me didn't want to say out loud what I thought I'd heard. Saying it would make it real in a way that felt dangerous. The next morning, I found dirt on the hallway floor. Not much. Just a few small, pale smears, like someone had walked through mud and then half-heartedly wiped their shoes before coming inside. It was the same color as the soil along the cemetery wall. I cleaned it up. What else do you do? I vacuumed, then mopped, focusing on the simple physical motion of it. The sound of the vacuum drowned out the softer noises, the radiator ticks, the house settling. For a little while, it was just me and the hum of the machine. I keep thinking there's a moment in every story like this when the person decides to move. Sell the house, break the lease, whatever. That's not how it works in real life. Leases are contracts. Jobs are fixed schedules. Erin likes her work. I can't just pick up and leave because of footprints and flowers and noises in the night. It sounds flimsy when you try to explain it, even to yourself. The last real straw, if you want to call it that, happened on a Thursday. I was on a call with an insurance rep, the kind where you're mostly on hold while they check something in the system. I had them on speaker and was half listening, half reading an email, when I realized someone was saying my name. Melissa? It wasn't the person on the phone. Their hold music was still playing, that tinny, over-cheerful tune. The voice saying my name was coming from the front room. It sounded like Erin at first, but with an odd flatness, like all the warmth had been ironed out. "Just a sec," I told the phone, then muted it. "Yeah," I called out. Silence. I walked into the living room. The sunlight was coming in at an angle, lighting up dust motes in the air. Outside, the porch light was on, even though it was the middle of the day. It glowed weakly against the brightness. I went to the window. Across the street, the bench in front of the separated grave was empty, but there was something new on the stone. The glass jar was gone. In its place was a small metal vase, dull and gray. Inside it, a fresh bouquet of lilies, still closed, pale green at the tips. I don't know how, but I knew they were for me. That thought landed in my head with a calm, solid weight. Not a rush, not a jolt. Just a fact, like noticing it was Thursday. That evening, after Erin went to bed, I sat at the dining table with the old deed again. My eyes kept going back to that line about the house and the burial plot being kept together so long as family remains. I don't know if anyone in that cemetery is actually related to me. On paper, no. Different last names, different branches of different trees. But I started to think about family in a different way. Not just blood, but proximity, shared space, shared time. If someone sits on a bench and watches a house for 100 years, are the people who live there strangers, or do they become something else? I still don't have an answer. I didn't go back to the city office. I didn't talk to Ron again. I didn't ask the corner store woman what she hadn't said. At some point, questions feel less like curiosity and more like knocking on a door you're not sure you want opened. These days, I keep my routine. I get up, make coffee, work my job. Aaron and I joke about normal things, bills, our weird neighbors, the latest dumb thing someone posted online. Life goes on. But I notice patterns now. The porch light still comes on some nights at 3:17. Not every night, often enough. The gravel crunches when there's no one there. Sometimes in the middle of a phone call or while I'm chopping vegetables, I hear my name said in a voice that is almost mine. I've stopped trying to figure it out. I don't stand at the window and stare anymore. I don't cross the street to check the stone up close. I don't ask who's leaving flowers or why the records don't match what's in the ground. I just know that every morning when I open the curtains, that grave in the back corner has something on it. Even in the dead of winter, when the snow should make it hard to get back there, there'll be a little cleared spot and something new resting against the stone. A pine bough, a single rose, a sprig of dried herbs tied with string. Things that shouldn't stay fresh as long as they do. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Rachel, and I'm from Madison, Georgia. Most people hear across from a cemetery and think that sounds like the beginning of some scary story. For me, it was just cheaper rent. Madison isn't big, and old places don't get knocked down. They just get divided and repainted and rented out to people who don't mind slanted floors and weird noises in the pipes. I'd been living there a little over a year when everything happened. At first, it was fine. Peaceful, even. I work as a medical billing clerk for a clinic off the highway. It's not exciting. I stare at screens, coding insurance claims, calling people about balances they don't want to talk about. I get home around 5 most days, and most of the time, I'm too tired to do much. I microwave something, sit on the old couch by the front window, and look out at the cemetery across the road. That was my TV, I guess. Watching people come and go, seeing which graves got flowers on which holidays. I don't live alone. My younger sister, Lauren, moved in about 6 months after I did. She had just broken up with a guy in Athens and needed a place fast. She pays the smaller share of the rent and buys the coffee, which is fair because she works nights at a bar and sleeps half the day. She was the one who joked about the cemetery the most at first. At least the neighbors are quiet, she'd say. Or, if we ever get robbed, I'm hiding in there. No one's going to look behind Mrs. 1892. Stuff like that. The cemetery itself isn't big. It fits in the block right across from us, pressed between a little church on one side and a row of pecan trees on the other. I'd call it a small Victorian-era cemetery, if I had to label it. There's an old iron fence around most of it, the kind with points on top. Right in the front, there's a decorative gate that never quite closes right, so it always looks like it's waiting for someone. Near the road, the grass stays neat, like somebody's mowing it on a schedule. But once you go past the first row or two of stones, it gets tangled. Ivy and clover, some high grass in summer. The back half looks like it's slowly trying to take the whole place back. There are a couple of things that stand out in there. One is a broken angel statue. Not huge, just a child-sized figure on a pedestal with one wing missing. The face is kind of worn off, so it looks like it's been rubbed smooth by time. The other is a grave way off to the right, almost pushed into the fence line by itself. All the other graves are in rows, family plots with the same last name, but that one stands alone. It has a short, square stone and no last name, just a first name and some dates. From the porch, you can't read it. It's just the one on the side. The house we rent is a one-story place, peeling white paint, front porch that leans a little. The screen door creaks every time you open it, and if you don't pull it shut behind you, the spring does that slow, complaining whine. At night, if the air is still, I can hear dogs barking a few streets over, trains way off somewhere, and sometimes the church bell from downtown if they're doing something in the evening. We've got a motion light over the driveway that likes to flicker before it settles on. In summer, you can hear insects in the trees, loud and constant until they stop all at once, which is always a weird kind of silence. It all felt normal, Old Town normal. Madison has those old red brick buildings with little antique shops, a diner that's been there longer than my mother, and big trees that drop leaves all over the sidewalks. Everybody knows everybody, or at least pretends they do. I'd stop for groceries after work, talk to the cashier about the weather, and then go home, park by the side, feel the gravel crunch under my shoes, and glance over at the cemetery without thinking anything of it. If anything, it was comforting in a strange way. On Sundays, families came to visit graves, especially in spring when the azaleas bloomed. I'd see older women cleaning off headstones, brushing leaves away with their hands, or men in their 50s kneeling to fix a little American flag. Every so often, someone would sit on the low stone near the broken angel and just stare for a long time. I got used to that. It was part of the view. Life, death, all that. Just part of the neighborhood. The small things started in late September. The weather shifted, cooler in the evenings. I remember because I started bringing a light jacket to work and forgetting it in my chair. One night, I was standing on the porch talking to Lauren while she smoked. The air smelled like someone burning leaves somewhere, sharp and dry as... Across the road, the iron gate to the cemetery swung open a few inches, then a little more, like someone had pushed it. We both heard the faint squeal. There was no one there. Wind, I said, automatically. You could feel a small breeze, enough to move the pecan branches. Lauren blew out smoke and looked at it for a second. Yeah, okay, she said, still creepy as hell. I shrugged. Gates move, hinges loosen. It was the most boring possible explanation, which is what I wanted. A few days later, I was home alone around dusk, sitting by the front window with my laptop in my lap, half working on some overdue online training for the clinic. I glanced up and noticed flowers on one of the older graves, up front near the broken angel. Yellow ones, could have been Mom's. They were in a simple glass jar, like the ones from the dollar store. I tried to think if I'd seen anyone over there that day. I hadn't. I hadn't really been watching though. People come and go. Maybe someone stopped by while I was in the back doing laundry or running the shower. The next evening, those same flowers looked fresher, not drooping at all, even though the sun had been out and it had been warm. I told myself it hadn't really been that hot, that the shade from the tree had kept them from wilting. I caught myself thinking, do cut flowers even last that long? And got annoyed with myself. It's stupid what your brain decides to focus on. Around the same time, the motion light over our driveway started going off more. At first I assumed it was stray cats. Madison has plenty of those. But there were a couple of nights when it flicked on, stayed on like it was watching something, and then went off again after a long time. I'd go out and check once in a while, the screen door protesting, the boards under my feet making that hollow wood sound. I'd step onto the porch, feel the cooler air hit my face, and look around. Nothing. Just the cemetery across the way, the iron fence lines, and maybe a car going by once every 15 minutes. Lauren joked about it. The dead gotta stretch their legs too, she said one night, pulling her hoodie tighter around her shoulders. Let them walk, they're not paying rent. You're not paying much either, I said, and we both laughed. It felt good to keep it in that lane. Jokes, eye rolls, normal. Then came the first time I heard it. What I thought was a voice. Not even a word, really. Just the shape of one. It was one of those nights where the insects were so loud, it felt like a wall of sound. I was in the front room with the TV off, lying on the couch with my feet up on the armrest. The only light was a floor lamp behind me. Lauren was at work. I was scrolling my phone, half reading something, when all at once, the insect noise outside stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone hit a switch. I noticed it because the quiet felt wrong. The house noises stepped in to fill it. The faint hum of the fridge, a soft tick from the wall, something settling in the ceiling. I held my breath without meaning to. Then, over all of that, very faint, outside the window, I heard something that sounded like someone saying my name. Not clearly, more like someone about to say it and then changing their mind halfway through. Rach. And a little breath after. I sat up fast, my heart going too loud in my chest. It sounded like it came from across the street, near the fence. I told myself it was a kid or someone walking a dog. I went over and pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers and looked out. The porch light across the street at the church was on. Ours was off. The iron fence was a line of dark shapes. No people, no movement. I stayed there a minute, listening. The insects started back up again in a ragged kind of way, like they were restarting a song and trying to find their place. I went to bed telling myself I was tired. I am not the kind of person who hears voices. I don't do sensitive or gifted or any of that. I do copays and CPT codes and spreadsheets. The little things kept happening though. The gate swinging just a bit when there was no wind. The flowers changing but never wilting. Sometimes there'd be fresh ones on a very old grave, then a different kind a couple days later, but I never saw anyone bring them. The motion light clicked on in the evenings, especially if either of us was near the front door. Lauren started saying she had weird dreams when she slept on the couch. It's like I'm awake, but I can't move, she said one morning, sitting at the tiny kitchen table with her mug between both hands. And there's someone out there on the sidewalk, but I can only see their shoes. What kind of shoes? I said. That's the kind of question I ask. Details make things smaller. She frowned. I don't know, just dark shoes. Old, maybe. I keep hearing gravel crunch like somebody's walking up, but they never come up the steps. Sleep paralysis. I said, you should stop falling asleep with the TV on. Yeah, Dr. Rachel, she said, then quieter. It feels real though. A few weeks later, I had to go to the county records office for something boring. Property tax information for the clinic. While I was waiting for them to pull the file, I remembered I'd been meaning to look up our rental house. The place is old. I wanted to know when it was built, maybe who'd owned it originally. It's the sort of thing you get interested in when you live in a small town and don't have much else going on. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Price, has lived here longer than anyone I know. I asked her if she could check the history on our address. She typed for a while, squinting at the screen the way she does. That little white one across from the cemetery, she said. That's the one. She hummed. Built 1898, looks like. Been in a few hands. Church owned it at one point. She clicked around some more. A lot of these older records aren't digitized. You'd have to look at the paper books if you want more than names and dates. Is there anything weird about it? I asked, half joking. You know, besides the location. She gave me a quick kind of glance and then smiled, but it didn't really reach her eyes. Old houses all have stories, she said. That one's no different. Like what? I said. She moved her mouse a little, even though she didn't need to. Nothing on the record that matters now, she said. You say you live there? You having any trouble with the wiring or... No, I said. It's fine, just curious. Well, curiosity's fine, she said. Just don't go digging too deep in old ground. You won't like everything you find." Then she chuckled, but it edged into something else, and she printed my forms, and that was the end of it. On my way home, her choice of words bothered me more than it should have. Old ground. There are a lot of graves in that little patch of old ground across the street. Some dates go back to the 1870s. Some stones are sunken so far, you could trip on them if you weren't looking. I'd never thought to connect the house and the cemetery as anything more than neighbors. That evening, when I pulled into the driveway, my headlights swept across the fence. The iron bars threw long shadows on the grass. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing by that lone grave off to the side, just the outline of a figure. By the time I killed the engine and really looked, there was nobody there. I stood for a minute by the car, listening. The air felt colder than it should have, damp and heavy, like right before rain. Somewhere far away, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, heard the little crunch of grit on the floorboards by the door, and made a note to sweep. The house smelled a little like damp earth. That's not unusual in an old place when the weather's been up and down, but it made me think of the cemetery again. The first time the noise came inside, I was alone again. Lauren had gone to her shift. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes, and the faucet was running. Over that, I heard what sounded like footsteps on our front porch. Not heavy ones, light, careful ones, like someone trying not to be noticed. The boards made that small protesting creak they make when you step in the wrong spot. Then there was the soft clink of the screen door moving just a little. I turned the water off. The silence that dropped in was thick. I waited. Another small creak. It sounded like whoever it was had stepped closer to the door. My phone was in the other room. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked down the short hall, feeling my own footsteps in the floor. The porch light, which is supposed to be on a sensor, flicked on as I got near the door. For some reason, I didn't open it. I just stood there with my hand on the knob, feeling my pulse in my fingers. "Can I help you?" I called out. My voice sounded stupidly loud. Nothing. No answer. I waited another 10 seconds and then pulled the door open fast. The screen door squealed. The porch was empty. The motion light shone out across the yard, catching little bits of dust in the air. The cemetery across the road was just dark shapes and pale stones. There was no one walking away, no car driving off. I told myself someone had come up the steps, changed their mind, and left quickly. It happens. Wrong house, kids messing around. But when I looked down, there was a dark smear on the top step. I bent a little. It looked like mud, tracked in a partial shoe shape. It wasn't raining. It hadn't rained in days. I stepped back and closed the door slowly. Later that week, Lauren noticed the footprints inside. I'd kind of been trying not to see them. Little smudges near the entryway, one by the hallway where there shouldn't have been any. Some of it looked like dirt from outside. Some like the dusty stuff that settles under old houses. "You forget to wipe your shoes?" she said, pointing with her socked foot. "I always wipe my shoes," I said. "I did. It's one of my little control things." She rolled her eyes. "Well, maybe I did," she said. "I don't remember." She looked at the door for a second longer than she had to. "We should get a rug." We said we'd get one, and never did. I started keeping track of certain things after that. Not like a crazy person, just paying attention. I noticed that the driveway light clicked on a lot more on nights when the sky was clear and quiet. I noticed that the gate to the cemetery was almost always a little open after 10 p.m., even on nights when there was no wind at all. I noticed that the flowers on that one grave, the one near the broken angel, changed every week, always fresh, different colors, but never a wilted petal, never an empty jar sitting there. Always full, like someone had just been by. One Saturday afternoon, I finally walked over there. It felt stupid to avoid it when I saw it every day. The sky was dull, a flat gray, and the air smelled like wet leaves. Gravel from the shoulder of the road crunched under my sneakers as I crossed. The iron gate opened with a long, soft squeal, like it was used to being moved and complaining about it anyway. Up close, the stones looked more crowded. Some leaned, some had sunk so far the earth had swallowed half the names. The broken angel stood just off the main path. Someone had propped the missing wing against the base, which somehow made it look worse. The flowers at the grave beside it were white this time. White carnations in a clear jar with a rubber band around the top. The name on the stone was worn, the letters shallow. I could make out the last name, Cox. The dates put the death around 1903. I looked for fresh footprints in the dirt, some sign of whoever kept bringing flowers. But the ground was just a mix of old paths and squirrel tracks. The back half of the cemetery really was wild. Grass up to my ankles in some spots, ivy wrapped around stones, a few headstones crooked like loose teeth. Eventually, I moved over to the grave off to the side, the one almost pressed against the fence. Up close, I saw it was even smaller than I'd thought. Just a low stone, maybe a foot high. No last name. Just a first name and nothing else. I had to wipe some dirt away with my sleeve to read it. The letters were simple and straight. Lauren, 1879 to 1891. I stared at it a lot longer than I needed to. It's not like Lauren is a rare name or anything. People name kids that all the time. But something about seeing it there, alone on the side, same name as my sister, same neat block letters, it hit wrong. It felt like a coin landing on its edge. I told myself it was just a coincidence. There are 100 names out there in the world. Of course, some of them match. But when I went home and told Lauren, she didn't laugh. "You're lying," she said first. Then she saw my face and stopped. "Okay, show me." We went back together the next day, Sunday afternoon. More cars were parked along the street because families were visiting. A couple of kids were chasing each other between stones while an older man yelled at them to be careful. It was almost cheerful in a weird way. We walked to the side. The grave was there, of course. Same small stone, same simple letters. "Great," Lauren said, stuffing her hands into her jacket pockets. "That's not spooky at all." "It's just a name," I said. "Don't make it a thing." She looked at the dates. She was 12, she said quietly. "Medicine wasn't great back then," I said. Like that explained anything. There were fevers, stuff like that. Lauren kept looking at it like she was trying to see something else. "You know what's funny?" she said. "Sometimes when I wake up from those dreams, I could swear somebody's in the room with me. Like a girl standing in the doorway, but shorter." She laughed once without humor. "I'm sure that's not related at all, right?" "You're scaring yourself," I said. "Don't do that." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't really believe anything I was saying. And the truth is, I didn't either. Not completely. After that, the line between the cemetery and the house felt thinner. That's the only way I can put it. Little things kept crossing over, things you could explain if you wanted, but they started stacking up. The smell of damp earth in the hall, even on dry days. The screen door half open in the morning when I knew I'd latched it at night. The sound of gravel crunching outside my bedroom window when no cars had gone by. The way the insects outside would go completely silent for a full minute sometimes, long enough for you to notice and look at each other and say, "Do you hear that?" in a low voice. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up thirsty. The house was quiet. The digital clock by my bed glowed 2:14. I swung my legs over the side, felt the coolness of the floor through my socks, and walked down the short hallway toward the kitchen. As I passed the living room, I saw something that made me stop. The front door was closed, but the deadbolt was unlocked and the chain was off. We always set both at night. Always. It's one of those habits you form without talking about it. I stood there a second, then went over and checked. The knob turned easily. I opened the door a crack and peered out through the screen. The porch light, which should have been off, flicked on as I moved the door. The light pooled on the steps, the front yard, the road beyond. There were small, dark marks on the porch floor. Not clear footprints this time, more like where something damp had been set down and then moved. The smell of earth rolled in, moist and cold. Across the street, large, dark shapes of trees shifted slightly in the light breeze. The cemetery fence made its neat line. I thought I saw movement near the broken angel, just a little shift of shadow, but it could have been my eyes adjusting. I locked the deadbolt, set the chain, and stood there with my hand on the top of the doorframe for a while. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The house felt too quiet. A few days later, I had to stop by the church office next door to the cemetery. We were doing a fundraiser at the clinic and wanted to put a flyer on their bulletin board. The pastor wasn't there, but an older woman who helped with the church finances was. Her name was Mrs. Jenkins. She'd been in Madison forever, too. We talked about the fundraiser, then about the weather. I don't really know how to leave well enough alone, so before I left, I asked her about the cemetery. "Do you know much about the graves over there?" I said. "Like the history and all that?" She gave me a look over the rims of her glasses, the kind older people give when they're deciding how much to say. "I know enough," she said. "We've got records in the back room if you're looking for someone in particular." "There's a little grave off to the side," I said. "Just a first name on it, Lauren." I was curious why it's alone like that. Her hand tightened a bit on the edge of the desk. It was a tiny movement, but I caught it. "Some of the older plots don't have full records," she said. "People passed through, families moved, not everybody stayed." "So nobody knows who she was?" I asked. "I didn't say that," she said. Her voice stayed even, but the temperature in the room felt like it dropped a degree. "Certain things just don't need to be revisited. Folks who were here before us did what they could with what they had." "That sounds like you're avoiding my question," I said, trying to smile. It came out wrong. Mrs. Jenkins looked at me for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Honey, take this from someone who has seen more years than you have," she said. "Not every grave in that yard is about someone who's gone. Some of them are about keeping something put where it needs to stay. You understand?" "Not really," I said. She gave the smallest of shrugs. "Then let it be," she said. "You live across there, don't you? With your sister?" "Yes," I said, surprised she knew. Her eyes flicked to the window. "Then keep your doors locked at night and don't go calling out if you hear your name from across the road," she said. "Just because something sounds familiar doesn't mean it's meant for you." I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do. "You make it sound like a horror movie." She shook her head. "No," she said. "Movies want you to see things. Real life is quieter." I thought about her words that night when Lauren and I were in the living room. She'd made popcorn and was flipping through channels. The insects outside were loud. The porch light was off. Every now and then, headlights slid by the front windows as a car passed. "Do you ever feel like someone's saying your name when you're falling asleep?" Lauren asked suddenly, without looking away from the TV. "Sometimes," I said. "That's just your brain misfiring. They've studied it." "Yeah," she said, "because it always sounds like it's coming from the front yard." We both got quiet after that. Somewhere outside, the gravel shifted. It could have been a cat. It could have been anything. A week or so later, I was going through an old box in the hall closet, looking for some paperwork from when we first signed the lease. I'd shoved all that stuff in there a year ago and forgotten about it. The closet smells like dust and old wood. I pulled the box out, sat on the floor, and started going through it. There was the lease, folded in a plastic sleeve, plus some photocopies from the property management company. Tucked among those was a single loose page, yellowed around the edges. It looked like it had been copied from something older. The header said something about transfer of property, dated from the early 1900s. Most of it was formal language about land and boundaries. But near the bottom, in smaller print, there was a note in handwriting that hadn't copied clearly. I held it up toward the hallway light and squinted. A couple of words came through sharp enough to read: child, illness, confined to home. And then, lower down, burial to remain opposite in perpetuity. Opposite what? Opposite where? The line above mentioned the house lot and the graveyard parcel across the way. It made my stomach flip a little in a way I couldn't explain. I put the page back in the sleeve and shut the box. That night, rain finally came. It hit the roof in steady waves. The smell of wet dirt filtered into the house, stronger than usual. The motion light flicked on and off a few times, probably from the wind and rain. But every time it did, I had the sense of something standing just beyond its reach, waiting for the dark spots between the flashes. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of the screen door creaking very slowly. Up, then down, then up again, like it was being opened just an inch at a time, and then let go. The insects were quiet. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then I heard my name. Not loud, not harsh, just said. Right outside my bedroom door, like someone standing in the hall, right where the floorboard squeaks. Rachel? I knew Lauren was out. She had left for the bar around 9, and I'd heard her come in late enough times to know what that sounded like. This wasn't that. This was soft and steady, and so close that I could almost feel breath on my face, even though I was alone in my room. I didn't answer. I remembered what Mrs. Jenkins had said. Don't go calling out just because something sounds familiar. I rolled over slowly, faced the wall, and pulled the blanket up over my shoulder, like that was going to help. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought whoever it was could probably hear it. After a while, the house sound returned to normal. A little tick in the pipes, the soft hum of the fridge, faraway thunder. I don't know when I fell back asleep, but I did. In the morning, there were faint muddy marks in the hallway. Just little half moons and smudges, like somebody had walked through with damp feet, and then it dried. They started outside my door and faded toward the front of the house. I cleaned them up without saying anything. The next Sunday, I looked out the window and saw a woman sitting on the bench near the broken angel, facing the grave with the fresh flowers. I couldn't see her face clearly, just light hair pulled back and a long coat. She sat there for a long time, not moving much. I almost went out to ask if she was okay. I even opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch. The wind pushed at my hair. Somewhere in the trees, a couple of crows called back and forth. When I looked back toward the bench, she was standing. She turned slightly toward my side of the street. For a second, I had the weird feeling that she was looking directly at our house, right at me, even though I was just a shape on a porch. Then she walked toward the back part of the cemetery, toward the wild half, and slipped out of sight behind the taller stones. 2 minutes later, Lauren's car pulled into the driveway. I waited for her to come up the steps. "Did you see that woman?" I asked. "What woman?" she said, shifting her bag on her shoulder. "In the cemetery," I said, "sitting by the angel statue." She glanced over. "There's nobody there," she said. I looked. The bench was empty, no sign of anyone. The flowers at that grave were red now. I hadn't noticed when they changed. I don't sleep on the couch anymore. Neither does Lauren. We both stick to our rooms, doors closed. Some nights, one of us will text the other from 10 feet away just to ask, "Did you hear that?" instead of saying it out loud. The insects still go quiet once in a while. The motion light still flicks on when there's nothing in the driveway. The gate across the road never seems fully shut when it's dark. I've stopped going over there, to the cemetery. The house feels like enough to deal with. but I still look through the window sometimes, usually without meaning to, and my eyes go straight to that one grave off to the side, the one with my sister's name on it, set apart near the fence. From the porch, you can't read the dates or the name. You can only see the shape of the stone and whatever's sitting in front of it. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Rachel, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I've lived most of my life in this town. Except for a couple years, I tried to make it in Minneapolis and just got tired and broke. Stillwater is slower and smaller. And after a while, you start to recognize people just by the way they walk, even from far down the sidewalk. We have the river, the old brick buildings, the antique shops, the kind of place people come to on weekends to feel like they've stepped back in time a little. For me, it's just home. I work as a medical billing clerk for one of the clinics over in town. It's not exciting. My days are full of codes and claims and chasing down insurance denials. I sit in a small office with humming fluorescent lights and a window that looks out at a parking lot and a strip of trees. I get in around 8, make myself coffee in the shared kitchen, and put on the same low-volume playlist so I don't have to listen to the copier all day. I go home a little after 5, unless I get stuck on hold with an insurance company. That's basically my life in one sentence. A couple years ago, my cousin Lily moved in with me. She's younger than me by about 8 years. She got a job at a little design firm in town and needed a place while she figured things out, which I think she's still doing. We get along fine. She's louder than I am, more social, but she's easy to live with. She helps with the rent, cooks sometimes, and keeps plants alive, which I've never been good at. The house we rent is small and a little crooked, one of those older places that feels like it leans slightly even when it doesn't. It's on a quiet street just off the main road, with a sagging front porch and a short gravel driveway. The thing people always notice when they first come over is what's across the road. There's a small cemetery there, right across from our house. If you stand on our front steps, you're basically looking straight at it. It's been there since the 1850s, from what the landlord told me. It's not a big place, just a small patch of ground with a low brick wall around it, maybe the size of a couple of backyards put together. Near the road, it looks neat and taken care of. The grass is trimmed. The stones closer to the gate are standing straight, some of them cleaned up, little flags on a few of the older graves on certain holidays. The farther back you look, the more it gets tangled, like somebody lost interest halfway through. The grass runs higher. Bushes press in from the sides, and you can see where some of the stones lean or sink. There's a simple opening in the brick wall with a short iron gate that doesn't quite latch right. A narrow gravel path runs from the gate toward the middle, where there's this old wooden bench just facing one particular grave. That always struck me as a little strange. Just that it's not in the center, not facing the whole cemetery, just that one headstone. But I figured maybe it was some family thing. It never felt creepy to me at first. Honestly, I liked it. At night, the town gets quiet, and from our porch, you can see the tops of the stones under the streetlights. There's a big tree near the road, so when the wind moves through, you get that soft rustle of leaves. Sometimes you hear a dog barking somewhere off behind the houses, or a car passing far away, but mostly it's just still. I'd sit out there with a mug of tea after work and just kind of let my brain empty out. Lily would come out sometimes, flip on the porch light that likes to flicker once or twice before it settles, and joke about our neighbors. "It's free security," she said once, leaning on the railing. "Nobody's gonna break into a house across from a cemetery. Bad energy." I told her that was nonsense, and we laughed about it. That was how it was. Just a weird little detail about where we lived. The first small thing I noticed was the flowers. There's one grave the bench faces. I won't say the name on the stone because I don't really want to put that out there, but it's not a recent one. The dates put the death in 1893. The stone is simple, kind of worn, not one of the big fancy ones. For the first year we lived there, it was just another old grave. A little lichen on the edges, grass growing up around it. Nothing special. Then one Saturday morning in early spring, I was sitting on the porch with my coffee, looking across the road, and I saw a small bunch of white flowers resting at the base of that stone. They looked fresh, not store-bought, just a little handful of wildflowers, stems wrapped with a bit of twine. I hadn't seen anyone there that week. I pay more attention than I probably should. But my desk faces the front window, and I look up when a car goes by. Nobody had parked over there or anything. It stuck in my mind for a second, but I figured maybe someone came early in the morning, or while I was at work the day before. A week later, those flowers were wilted and brown like you'd expect. A few petals on the ground. Then, one evening, I came home a little later than usual. The sun had just gone down, and the streetlights were flicking on. I glanced across, the way I always do, and there was another small bunch of flowers on the same grave. Purple this time. Fresh. "You see that?" I asked Lily when she came in from the kitchen. I pointed out the front window. "What, the cemetery?" she said. "Our VIP neighbors?" "No, that one," I said. "Center, where the bench is. There were flowers there last week. Someone brought more." She squinted, then shrugged. "Maybe some family tradition. Some people take that stuff really seriously. It's kind of sweet." I thought so too, at the time. Sort of comforting. People remembered this person from 1893 enough to bring wildflowers every week. I didn't think about how odd that really was. Not then. Little things began to stack up over the next month. The gate, for one. When we moved in, the gate to the cemetery always seemed closed, even if it didn't latch tight. You could tell when it was open because it would swing a little when cars went by. I started noticing it open more often, especially in the mornings. I'd step out with my coffee, and there it would be. Just a little crooked, not fully swung out, but not resting against the post either. "It's the wind," I told myself. "We get a decent breeze coming over the hill some mornings. It could pull it open a little." When I went over once to check, the latch didn't really line up, and the metal was a bit rusted. I had to wiggle it even to pretend to close it. It made sense that it wouldn't stay shut. We have a motion light over our front door, one of those cheap ones the landlord put in. It's pointed slightly down the front steps, but it catches movement in a pretty wide arc. Occasionally, at night it would click on, bright and sudden, and I'd hear the tiny hum it makes through my bedroom window. I figured it was raccoons, or a neighbor walking by, or one of those drifting clouds of bugs. One night, I got up to get a glass of water and saw the light steady and bright through the front curtains. I went over and peeked out. The street was empty. No cars moving, no people walking. The light stayed on for a long time, longer than usual, before it finally clicked off. I watched the gate across the road the whole time. It moved a little in the breeze. Nothing else. "You're staring at that place a lot," Lily said the next morning as I stood with my coffee at the window. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just up too late." The porch light kept going off and on. "It's the bugs," she said. Or, the restless dead, whichever. She grinned at me and bumped my shoulder. It was a joke. We treated it like one. That made it easier to shrug off the little things. The first time I heard what I thought was a voice, I was walking home from the store. It was one of those early summer evenings where the air feels heavy but not hot yet, and you get that faint smell of cut grass and grill smoke from different directions. A couple kids were biking up the street. Somewhere a dog was barking, sharp and repetitive. I turned the corner onto our block and saw the cemetery ahead, that same quiet stretch. As I passed the gate, I heard someone say my name. Just Rachel. Not loud, not a shout. More like the way someone would call you from inside a room, expecting you to be close. I stopped without even thinking and looked back. The street behind me was empty. There was no one on the sidewalk, no cars passing right then. Inside the cemetery, the stones were just shapes in the fading light. The bench was where it always was, facing that same grave. The flowers there were a soft, pale yellow that week. I stood there a second longer, listening. A truck turned onto the main road a couple blocks away. A crow called from a tree. The dog barked again, then stopped. I told myself it was somebody down the street calling someone with a similar name, and the sound had bounced weird off the brick wall. Sound does strange things in small neighborhoods. When I got home, Lily was on the couch with her laptop, headphones half on. "Hey," she said. "You look weird." "Do you ever feel like someone said your name but they didn't?" I asked. She slid one ear of the headphones off. "You mean like when you think your phone buzzed and it didn't?" "Yeah, like that." "Your brain's bored," she said. "You need to come out with me more." And that was the end of it, at least on the surface. The next time it happened was a week or so later, early morning. I was sitting on the porch steps, tying my shoe before work. It was quiet enough that I could hear the small stones of the driveway crunching under my heel when I shifted. The sun was just starting to hit the tops of the trees, and there was that damp, cool smell from the grass across the road. Rachel. It came from my left that time, close enough that I felt the hair on my arms lift. I turned my head so fast, I almost made myself dizzy. The porch was empty. The sidewalk was empty. Across the road, the cemetery sat in that soft kind of light you get early, and a breeze moved through the branches. I stood up, heart beating stupidly fast, and tried to laugh at myself. "You're tired," I muttered. "You need more sleep, not more coffee." I said it out loud, like I was correcting a kid. That helped a little. Talking to myself always has. When these things pile up, you don't really notice the pattern at first. It's like background noise slowly getting louder, but because it's gradual, you keep thinking you're imagining it. The flowers kept changing every week on that same grave. No matter what the weather had been like, they were always fresh. Sometimes they were wildflowers. Sometimes they looked like garden flowers, neat little bunches of pink or white. Once I saw a tiny spray of roses, always that one stone, never any of the others. I started looking for whoever was bringing them. From our front window, you can see most of the cemetery. I kept my desk turned at a slight angle so I could pretend I wasn't watching all the time. I'd see people go in occasionally. An older couple visiting a grave near the front, a man in work clothes tending to the grass near the entrance. But nobody ever went to that one, at least not when I was looking. "Maybe they come super early," Lily said when I mentioned it. "Like sunrise people, runners or dog walkers or whatever." "I'm up early," I said. "I'd see them." She rolled her eyes. "Maybe they're ghosts then, happy." We didn't talk about it much after that. She thought I was getting fixated, and she wasn't entirely wrong. I started getting this little jolt in my chest. Every time I saw new flowers there. It wasn't fear at first. It was more this weird, tired curiosity. One Saturday, after putting it off for weeks, I walked over there. It felt silly, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. It was late morning. The sun was already a bit too bright, and I could hear a lawnmower a few streets over. I unlatched the gate, and it squeaked in a tired way. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked down the narrow path. Up close, you notice more. The stones near the front are mostly from later years, early 1900s, some mid-century. As you walk back, the dates get older. The ground isn't as even. I could see where some graves had sunk a little, the grass dipping down over them. Some stones had moss or lichen covering parts of the names. On more than a few of the older stones, the death year was the same, 1893. Not all of them, but enough that I noticed. Different last names, some whole family plots, with that year showing up more than once. I told myself there had probably been some kind of illness going around then. Flu or something like that. Towns used to get hit hard. There'd be a reasonable explanation if I went looking for it. The bench looked even older up close. The wood was gray and worn, but solid when I touched it. It sat directly in front of one particular stone, not quite centered, but close, like it had been placed for someone who wanted that exact view. The grave itself was simple. A first and last name, 2 dates, a short line beneath, that was mostly worn smooth. The death year was the same, 1893. At the base of the stone, someone had left a small bunch of white and purple flowers that I didn't recognize. They were fresh. There was still a faint dampness on the stems, like they'd been cut that morning. No card, no ribbon, just the twine. I sat on the bench for a minute, feeling a little foolish, and listened. The street was quiet. A bird chattered somewhere in the bushes, then went silent. My shoes made a faint crunch as I shifted my feet on the gravel. A faint breeze moved through the leaves, and the wooden bench creaked a little under my weight. That was it, nothing else. On my way out, as I passed a row of older stones, I noticed a small group of unmarked fieldstones, just rounded, uneven rocks in a row. No names, no dates. They were sunk a bit into the ground, like they'd been there a long time. I stood for a second, staring at them, my skin prickling for no good reason. Then I shook it off and went back home. After that, I thought maybe going in there would make it feel more normal. Instead, I started to feel watched whenever I crossed the street. Not from the whole cemetery, not in a dramatic way. Just from that one direction where the bench and that stone were. I'd tell myself I wasn't going to look, and then I'd look anyway. Half the time, the flowers had changed. At some point, the disturbances stopped being just over there and started touching our side of the street. The first time I really noticed that shift, it was raining. Not a heavy storm, just a steady, gray afternoon kind of rain that makes everything quiet. I was working from home because we'd had some system update at the clinic. Lily had gone into her office. It was mid-afternoon. The radiator in the living room was making that soft clanking it does when it's working a little too hard. The windows were fogged slightly from the difference in temperature. I got up to make tea and walked past the front door. Out of habit, I glanced through the latch in the curtains toward the cemetery. The gate was standing wide open. The gravel path was darker from the damp. The bench was there. The flowers at that grave were bright against all the gray. No one was in sight. I watched for a minute, expecting to see someone come back into view, but there was nothing, just rain tapping against the glass. When I turned back toward the kitchen, my sock slid slightly on the wooden floor. I looked down. There was a faint muddy footprint near the door, just one, right in front of the mat. It wasn't sharply defined, more like someone had stepped on the mat with wet shoes, then stepped onto the floor, leaving most of the dirt there in a faint outline. I checked the locks. The door was deadbolted, chain on. The back door was locked. All the windows were shut. There was nobody else home. I told myself I must have tracked it in earlier, even though I hadn't gone out since that morning, and it hadn't been raining then. I scrubbed it away with a paper towel and pretended not to notice that the dirt smeared darker before it finally lifted. That night, the porch light kept clicking on. I tried to ignore it, but you notice that kind of thing when you're lying in bed and the house is otherwise quiet. Light, hum, click. Then darkness again. At one point, I was sure I heard the front screen door creak just a little, like someone had pulled it part way and let it ease back. "Did you hear that?" I called down the hall. Lily's door was half shut. "Hear what?" she said, voice muffled. "The door." She opened her door and stepped into the hall. "Your house noises are getting to you," she said. "It's an old place." She wasn't being mean. She was trying to calm me down, and I let it for a while. Things stayed manageable until fall. I don't know why that season made it worse. Maybe it was the earlier dark, or the way sound carries differently when the leaves start to dry out and scrape around the sidewalk. There's this period right before winter where the town feels emptied out, like it's holding its breath. One Saturday in October, I decided to finally ask someone about the cemetery. Not anything weird, just practical. I went down to the little city office near the river where they handle property records and permits. It's a narrow building with buzzing lights and that faint old paper smell. The clerk at the front was an older woman with glasses and a name tag that said Marion. I explained I lived across from the cemetery and was just curious about its history. I didn't mention the flowers. She nodded along, then went to a back room to check some binders. I could hear her flipping pages. The ticking of the wall clock felt louder with every second. When she came back, she looked faintly annoyed, but not at me. "Some of the old cemetery records are missing," she said. "Before 1900, it's hit or miss. We've got some plots listed, but not all." "Was there an epidemic or something?" I asked. "I noticed a lot of stones with the same death year, 1893. She hesitated just for a second, and I noticed it. "There were a few bad years around then," she said. "People got sick. There were accidents. Life wasn't easy." "Do you know anything about one particular grave?" I said, giving her the last name on the bench stone, trying to keep my voice casual. "Bench facing it, near the middle." She frowned, like she was trying to remember a song lyric. Then she shook her head. "Not off the top of my head," she said. "Those graves aren't always what you think they are, you know. Sometimes stones got moved, replaced, records got lost. I wouldn't read too much into it." "Okay," I said. It wasn't a satisfying answer. On my way out, I turned back to ask something else, maybe what she meant by that last comment. But she was already on the phone with someone, her back turned, her hand over her ear. I told myself she was just busy. Around that time, I started hearing footsteps at night, soft ones. We don't have heavy neighbors, and the houses aren't attached, so it wasn't someone upstairs. These came from our hallway, that narrow strip of wood between the bedrooms and the living room. A few slow steps, then nothing. Like someone tried walking careful and then stopped when they knew someone was listening. The first time, I opened my door and called out, "Lily?" Her door was closed. Light was off underneath. "Yeah?" she answered, sleepy. "Did you just walk down the hall?" "No," she said. "I was asleep. You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Sorry, go back to bed." I stood there for a while, listening to the radiator knock and the wind moving around the siding. The wood creaked once under my bare foot. It's an old house, I told myself again. Houses move, they settle. It didn't explain the rhythm of those steps, but I clung to it anyway. The worst moments weren't the obvious ones. They were the almost normal ones. The times I'd be in the kitchen, cutting something on the board, and hear Lily call my name from the living room, clear as day, except when I answered, there'd be no reply. I'd walk in and find the room empty, TV off, lights off. Then a minute later, the front door would open and Lily would come in from outside, asking what was for dinner. "Did you call me a second ago?" I asked once, trying to sound casual. "No," she said, setting down her bag. "I was on the phone, out front." She paused. "Why?" "Nothing," I said. "Thought I heard you." Things went on like that for a while. Little disconnections. A door we were sure we'd shut left just slightly open. The back latch not quite caught. A shoe moved from where I'd left it by the door to the middle of the hall. I found my keys sitting on the kitchen counter, directly on top of a piece of mail addressed to me, like someone had laid them there carefully. I'd swear I dropped them in the bowl by the door, because I always do. One evening, I was going through some paperwork at the kitchen table. Insurance forms, old bills, that kind of thing. I had a small stack of older documents from when I'd first moved into the house. Leasing paperwork, copies of old property tax notices the landlord had given me for my records. Just boring stuff. I flipped one over and saw a list of previous lot owners. Most of the names didn't mean anything to me. Then my eyes caught on one near the bottom. The last name was mine, not just the last name. The whole thing, first and last, same spelling. The year next to it was 1891. For a second, everything around me went sort of quiet. I could still hear things, but they felt far away. The fridge humming, a car passing outside, the faint bark of a dog down the block. My fingers felt a little numb around the paper. It was probably a coincidence, I told myself. People share names all the time. I don't have an especially rare one. It made sense that somebody with my name could have lived on that lot over 100 years ago. Still, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't quite breathe through. I stood up and went to the front window, more out of habit than anything. The porch light had come on automatically. Across the road, the cemetery sat in its usual stillness. The gate was closed. The bench was in its place. I could just make out the pale shape of that one stone the bench faced. At its base, in the yellowish glow from the streetlight, I could see something small and bright. Flowers, of course. "Hey," Lily said from the doorway, making me jump a little. "You good?" "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Just spacing out." She looked past me out the window. "Your little obsession spot," she said softly. Then she added, quieter, "I had a weird dream last night." "What kind of dream?" "I was sitting on that bench," she said, nodding toward the cemetery. "And someone was standing behind me. I couldn't see them, just heard them breathing. They put their hand on my shoulder and it was cold. Not like normal cold, just wrong. Then I woke up and my shoulder was freezing. It's stupid. Forget it." I tried to joke. "You watch too many horror movies." She gave a short laugh, but it sounded forced. "Maybe," she said. "Anyway, I'm gonna shower." That night, I slept with my door half open, which I never do. I woke up once around 3 a.m. The house was very quiet. No cars, no dogs, no train horn in the distance. Just the little tick of the clock in the living room and the soft, settling sounds of old wood. I had that feeling you get when someone's standing over your bed, even though you're alone. I stared at the doorway, waiting to see Lily's silhouette or the edge of light from the hall. There was nothing, just darkness. In the morning, there was a faint trail of grit leading from the front door toward the hallway. Not clear footprints, just little crumbs of dirt, the kind you get from gravel and dried mud. I swept it up without saying anything. I don't have a big, dramatic ending to this. Nothing jumped out at me. Nothing moved in front of my face. The closest I've come to something I can't talk myself out of happened a few weeks ago. I was getting ready for work, standing by the front window, buttoning my coat. It was still dark out, that blue-gray kind of dark you get before sunrise. The porch light was on, buzzing faintly. Across the street, I could see the shapes of the stones, the low line of the brick wall. There was a light mist over the grass, making everything look a little soft around the edges. As I watched, someone walked through the gate. I couldn't see them clearly, just a darker shape moving in that dimness. They walked slowly down the gravel path. I could hear the faint crunch of it through the glass, just barely. They sat on the bench. From where I was, they were just a shadow against the shadow of the cemetery. My mouth went dry. I thought about waking Lily, but I didn't move. I just stood there, coat half buttoned, watching. The shape leaned forward slightly, as if looking at the stone. After a few seconds, they reached down with one arm, like they were placing something at the base of it. Flowers, I assumed. I waited for them to stand up and leave. They didn't. They just sat there, very still. The mist thinned a little as the sky got lighter, and for a moment I thought I could see more details. Maybe the tilt of a hat or the outline of a shoulder, but every time I tried to focus, it blurred. Then the porch light flickered, the way it does sometimes. Once, twice. When it steadied again, the bench was empty. I hadn't looked away. I hadn't blinked long enough for someone to stand up, walk back along the gravel, and leave through the gate. There hadn't been any sound. Just me, standing there with my heart hammering, staring at an empty bench and a grave with something small and bright at its base. I could have told myself I imagined it. Maybe I did. That's the thing that bothers me the most, that I don't trust my own memory now. I went into the kitchen, made my coffee, went to work. I filed claims, answered emails, nodded along in a boring meeting. All day, the image of that figure sitting on the bench stayed in the back of my mind, like a smudge on a window you can't quite wipe clean. I didn't go into the cemetery that day, or the day after. I don't go in there much at all anymore. I walk past it, I look at it, I listen to the way the wind moves the leaves around the stones, and I feel the weight of all the small, strange things I've tried so hard to explain. I still find my keys in places I don't remember leaving them. The porch light still comes on for no reason. Sometimes, late at night, I hear someone say my name from down the hall, in a voice that sounds a little like mine, and a little like someone else. I've stopped asking Lily if she hears it too. She's sleeping badly, I can tell. We're both getting through our days, going to work, paying rent, pretending it's just an old house and an old cemetery and a tired mind. That's easier than any other answer. I don't know what the records in that office really say about this lot. I don't know who sat on that bench the other morning, or if they were ever really there. I tell myself there are always logical explanations, even if I'm not smart enough or patient enough to find them. That's what I hold on to. But every few days, when I look out the front window, there's something new resting at the base of that one old stone. Wildflowers, or a small bunch from a garden, or once a single white rose. No matter the weather, no matter the season, they never seem wilted when I first notice them. They're always fresh. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Trevor, and I'm from Madison, Georgia. I always feel weird saying that like it explains everything, but I guess it kinda does. Madison's one of those small towns people drive through on their way somewhere else. We've got the old square, a couple of churches with white steeples, some oak trees that look like they've seen every bad decision this town ever made. It's quiet most nights. You can hear trains way out past the highway, dogs barking on streets you don't even know by name, stuff like that. I rent this small one-story house just off a side road. Brick front, sagging porch, screen door that never really shuts unless you tug it twice. The main thing is what's across the street. There's a modest old cemetery right there. Not huge, but not tiny either. It takes up the corner lot and stretches back farther than you think when you first look at it. It's been there since the 1870s, or so they say. Near the road, it looks kinda nice. Grass cut, gravel path, a low brick wall that runs along the front and then climbs up the sides. There's a decorative iron gate in the middle, painted black but flaking. Past the first row or two of graves, it starts to get tangled, like the lawnmower guy just gave up one day and never went past the big oak. Back there, it's all tall grass and ivy, stones leaning, some of them half sunk. There's one grave set off by itself, close to the right-hand side wall, and there's a stone bench facing that one grave, like somebody built it just for that spot. I didn't pick the house because of the cemetery. Honestly, I picked it because it was cheap and 15 minutes from where I work. I'm an insurance adjuster, not the kind of job kids dream about, but it pays okay. I spend most days at a desk or driving to look at dented fenders, broken windows, busted roofs after storms. It's paperwork, photos, talking people through stuff when they're stressed. I don't live there alone. My cousin Marcus moved in about a year after I did. We grew up together, kind of on and off. And when he got a job over in Athens and didn't feel like paying city rent, he called me. Now he's the cousin who moved for a job whenever I talk about him. He's the laid-back one. graphic designer, works from his laptop half the time. He calls the cemetery our free soundproofing and says the neighbors are quiet and well-behaved. That's his usual joke. Most evenings are pretty simple. I come home, kick off my shoes by the door, sit on the porch with a beer, and just let my brain quiet down. Marcus will be inside with his headphones on, or he'll come out and sit on the top step, staring at the cemetery like it's a TV show. We listen to the insects get louder as it gets dark, hear the buzz of the streetlight kicking on, the creak of the wood porch when one of us shifts. The air smells like pine needles and sometimes like cut grass from the lot down the street. At first, the cemetery was just there, like a painting someone hung across from the house. The small headstones in neat rows near the front, a few taller monuments with angels and crosses, dates worn soft. The gravel path right inside the gate, the crunch of it under the groundskeeper's boots when he'd come by once every week or two. He's an older guy with a ball cap, always nods but never really talks. In the mornings, if I leave early, I'll see low fog between the stones, white breath hanging above the ground. Church bells ring from somewhere beyond the trees at the top of the hour. Every once in a while, a car pulls up, someone brings flowers, stands there a while, then leaves. It felt normal, sad sometimes, but normal. I got used to noting small things without really thinking about them. The way the wind pushed leaves along the brick wall, the way the porch light on our house flickered if the air felt damp, how the screen door always made that same dragging sound when it closed. I'd hear chipmunks scurrying along the fence line, chattering, then suddenly going quiet if a hawk passed overhead. Little everyday noises. If you'd asked me back then, I would have said it was a pretty peaceful place to live. Kind of strange, sure, being right across from a cemetery, but you adapt. People can get used to anything. The first thing that stuck out was the flowers. One Saturday morning in early spring, I came out with my coffee and sat on the porch like always. The light was still thin, gray-blue, and the street was empty. Across the way, on that one grave set apart near the right-hand wall, there was a vase of bright yellow flowers. Looked fresh. Not from the grocery store either, more like someone had cut them from a yard. Daffodils or something like that. I don't know flowers by name. I don't remember ever seeing anyone visit that grave. I noticed people go to the main rows sometimes, or to the cluster of family plots near the big oak, but that one off to the side always seemed alone. No decorations, no flags, nothing. It just sat there, half tilted, name half hidden under moss. Somebody finally remembered whoever that is, Marcus said later when he saw me staring. He was leaning on the porch railing, hair still messy from sleep. That's kind of sweet, actually. Yeah, I said. Guess so. By the next morning, the flowers looked the same. Still bright, upright, not wilted at all. It had been warmer than usual, and the sun had been on them for a good part of the day, so I figured they'd droop a little. But they looked like they'd just been put there. I didn't think too hard about it. Maybe whoever brought them came back. Maybe they were artificial, and I was just bad at noticing. I had stuff to do, claims to finish, people to call. Life chugged along. A week or so later, I woke up around 2 a.m, no reason I could name. Just that sudden awake feeling, like something shook you out of a dream you don't remember. The house was quiet. Marcus was asleep. I could hear him snoring faintly through the wall. I lay there for a minute listening. The old wood creaked in that slow, settling way. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then stopped. The radiator knocked once and went silent. Then I noticed a softer sound. A light crunch, 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 like someone walking on gravel. The cemetery. I told myself it was the groundskeeper or somebody cutting through. Maybe a stray cat, I don't know. I didn't get up. I listened for a minute until it faded, turned over, and forced myself back to sleep. The next day, around lunch, Marcus said, "You ever hear people out there at night?" I looked up from my sandwich. "What, like last night?" "Yeah," he said. I woke up and thought somebody was on the path. I almost checked, but I don't know. Felt dumb. We don't own the view, I guess. It's a public cemetery, I said. People can go in if they want. Some folks visit late. Avoid the daytime, I guess. He shrugged and changed the subject. That was how it started. Small things. Maybe nothing if you look at each one alone. The gate across the street started swinging open more often. Before all that, it was almost always shut, unless the groundskeeper's truck was parked nearby. But some evenings, I'd come home and see it standing open just enough, like someone had slipped in and forgotten to close it behind them. The wind can do that, sure. One corner of the gate is a little crooked, doesn't latch right. Still, I got in the habit of watching it. Sometimes I'd be on the porch, and the air would be still. No branches moving, no plastic bags tumbling along the gutter. Nothing. And the gate would move just a little, like a hand nudging it. Then it would stop. A couple of times my motion light by the front door would click on by itself, shining right toward the cemetery. I'd open the door, step out, and see nothing. No cars, no people, no cats. Just the light spilling across the street and catching the edges of the stones. I kept telling myself it was all explainable. Loose wiring, squirrels. Maybe I just wasn't seeing whoever was really there. The flowers on that one grave changed. After the yellow ones finally wilted or disappeared, there were white ones. Then later, those little purple ones you see in ditches. Each time they appeared overnight. I never saw anyone bring them. But I don't sit at the window all day, so it wasn't that strange. Still, there was something about the pattern that bothered me. When you look at the headstone from our porch, you can't really read the name. The letters are soft from weather, and there's some lichen or moss covering parts. I figured it was probably an older person, maybe someone whose family line moved away, or died out. I didn't really dwell on it. One afternoon, I stopped at the county office after work. I had paperwork to drop off for a claim, and since I was already there, I asked the lady at the records desk if they had anything on the cemetery across from my house. "It's the one on Old Church Road," I said, "with the low brick wall." She looked at me and kind of frowned like she was sorting through mental files. "The old town plot?" "Yeah, I think so." She tapped on her keyboard. "We don't keep much on the individual graves. Family records sometimes. Why? You looking for somebody?" "Just curious," I said. "There's one grave off by itself on the right. I was wondering why it's separate." She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keys. "Separate how?" "It's just away from the others, and there's a bench facing it. Seems like it was important to somebody." Something in her face closed off a little. Not angry, just done. "A lot of families did their own thing back then," she said. "You'd have to talk to the church, or the historical society. Records are patchy." "You don't have a map or anything?" I asked. "If we do, it's not digitized, and I'm about to go on lunch," she said, checking the clock. "Sorry, try the historical society. They love that stuff." She smiled like she was being polite, but there was this quick flick of her eyes, like she wanted me out of the conversation. I let it go. I had other things to do, and I felt silly pushing it. "It's just a grave," I told myself. "People get buried in weird spots all the time. Maybe there was some family drama 100 years ago. Not my business." The air around our place started feeling colder in the evenings, even when the forecast said it would be mild. I'd step out on the porch in a t-shirt and get that sudden chill, like someone opened a fridge door nearby. The hair on my arms would lift for a second. Then it would pass. The porch light would flicker, quiet, like it wanted to say something. One night, Marcus and I were sitting out there, not talking much, just watching the street. It was late. The insects were loud, then suddenly they weren't. It was like someone turned the sound off. No crunch of leaves, no buzzing, nothing. "You feel that?" Marcus said. "Feel what?" He rubbed his arms. "I don't know, just off. Like when a storm's coming, but there's no clouds. Across the street, the bench facing the separate grave was just a dark shape. For a second, I thought I saw something on it, like a darker patch in the darkness. Then one of the neighbor's porch lights down the road clicked on, and whatever I thought I saw just looked like shadows again. Marcus shook his head and laughed a little, but it sounded thin. "This place is messing with my head, man." "It's just a yard full of rocks," I said. "You're fine." "Yeah," he said. "Sure." The first time I heard my name, I was in the kitchen doing dishes. Marcus was at work in Athens that day, so I was alone. The afternoon sun was coming in all yellow through the window. I had the faucet running, plate in my hand, when I heard it from the back of the house. "Trevor?" Just like that. Neutral. Not scared, not urgent, just calling. I turned off the water, listened. "Yeah," I yelled back. Nothing. I dried my hands and walked through the hallway. The bedroom doors were open. Bathroom light off. Back door closed, deadbolt latched. The house was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a lawnmower a couple of streets over, but that was it. I checked my phone. No missed calls, nothing like that. I told myself it was the TV in the other room. Except the TV wasn't on. That night, Marcus came home and dropped his bag by the couch. "You called me earlier?" he asked. "No," I said. "Why?" He frowned. "Heard you say my name from the hallway when I was getting ready. Thought you were back early, but you weren't here." We looked at each other for a second, then both looked away, like we'd seen something awkward, not scary. "Old house," I said. "Weird acoustics." "Yeah," he said. "Weird acoustics." A few days later, it rained hard. One of those sudden Georgia storms, where the sky just opens up. The cemetery flooded in places. Puddles around the bases of the stones. Mud sliding down toward the brick wall. From the porch, I watched the rain streak through the glow of the streetlight and listened to the water dripping from the eaves, the long hiss of tires on wet asphalt. When it finally eased up and I went to bed, I remember feeling extra tired. The kind of tired where your body hurts a little. I fell asleep fast. I woke up before dawn. The light in the room was that dim gray that makes everything look soft. My nose was cold. The air felt damp, and my breath came out in little puffs I could almost see. I sat up and heard it again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of gravel under slow footsteps. But this time, it wasn't outside. Or if it was, it sounded closer somehow. Like the sound was inside the walls. I got up, grabbed the sweatshirt off the chair, and walked down the hall. The floorboards creaked under me. When I reached the living room, I saw the back door. The deadbolt was unlatched. The door itself was just barely closed, like it had been pulled shut without turning the knob. I knew I had locked it. I am careful that way. I deal with break-ins and claims and police reports. I check my locks. I remembered the click of the deadbolt before I went to bed. On the floor by the door, just inside, there were faint muddy marks. Not full footprints, just patches. Smears like something damp had brushed across the wood. They led a little way into the room and then stopped, as if whoever had left them decided to hover after that. I checked the yard. Nothing. Nobody. Just the wet grass, the shine of puddles on the sidewalk, and the cemetery across the street, quiet and gray. The flowers on that separate grave were standing straight up, drops of water clinging to the petals. For a second, I had the strong, stupid idea that they had just been placed there, like someone had run across in the dark to put them down. Marcus came out rubbing his eyes. "You up already? It's cold as hell." "Did you go outside?" I asked. He blinked. "No." "You didn't open the back door?" "No," he said. "Why?" I pointed. It was unlocked. He looked at the door, then at me. "Maybe you forgot." I wanted that to be true. I really did. After that morning, the house felt different. Not all the time, Sometimes it was perfectly normal. We'd sit on the couch, one of us on our phones, some dumb show playing in the background, and nothing felt wrong. Other times, though, I'd be walking from one room to another and get that sense that I wasn't timing my steps right, like someone else was walking in the same rhythm just behind me, barely out of sync. I started noticing patterns. The motion light by the front door would click on around the same time at night, between 2 and 3 in the morning. I checked it, changed the sensor, cleaned the casing. It kept doing it. Most nights I slept through it, but a few times I woke up right as it clicked on. There's a particular popping sound it makes, and somehow my brain learned that noise and decided it was important. I'd open my eyes, stare at the ceiling, and know the light outside was shining straight at the cemetery, catching the tops of the stones, the bench, the separate grave by the wall. One Sunday, after church traffic died down and the street got quiet again, I went across to the cemetery. I hadn't done that since moving in. It felt like crossing a line I'd been unconsciously respecting. The iron gate squealed when I pulled it open. The gravel crunched under my shoes, louder than I expected. The air inside the low brick wall felt cooler. Maybe it was just the shade from the trees. I walked down the main path, glancing at names and dates as I passed. Lots of old ones. 1873, 1881, 1902. Some children's stones with little lambs carved on top. In the back, where the grass grew taller, there were stones half covered in ivy, letters almost gone. When I got to the right-hand side, I found the separate grave. It was close to the brick wall, a few feet from the edge. The bench in front of it was simple stone, seat worn smooth, a faint hairline crack running across the middle. The inscription on the headstone was worn, but not impossible to read. I knelt down a little, squinting. I traced the letters with my eyes, picking them out one by one. Eli T. Caldwell, 1874 to 1897. There was something carved below the name, but the words had been eaten away by time. I could make out the beginning of beloved and not much else. Caldwell. It was a common enough name around here. There was a Caldwell Road on the other side of town, Caldwell's Hardware on the square. I didn't think much of it until I stood up and turned around. From that angle, I could see my house between the branches, the front porch, the sagging roofline, the storm door at a slight angle. The bench and the grave lined up almost perfectly with my front door. If you sat there, you'd be staring straight at it. On the way out, I heard another crunch behind me and turned, half expecting somebody to be there. There was nobody, just the bending of grass, a crow calling from somewhere high up, and then silence when it flapped away. That night, we ordered pizza. The delivery guy, some kid with a Braves cap, handed it off and glanced past me. "You live right across from that place?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Kind of hard to miss." He laughed once. "My grandma wouldn't even drive down this road after dark. Says she remembers when they dug those back plots." "Which ones?" I asked. He jerked his chin toward the right-hand side, past my shoulder. "The ones by the wall. Says her mom told her those weren't... You know what? Never mind. Enjoy your pizza, man." He walked off fast, like he'd suddenly remembered he was late. I stood on the porch with the box in my hands and felt the air cool around my face. Inside, Marcus flipped open the box. "Smells good. What did the guy want?" "Nothing," I said. "Just talking." A few days later, I went to the Historical Society like the clerk had suggested. It's a small brick building off the square, stuffed with old photos and dusty binders. The lady there, gray hair in a bun, glasses on a chain, seemed happy enough to dig through files. I gave her the name. Eli T. Caldwell, buried in the Old Town Cemetery on Old Church Road. She hummed, flipped pages, checked a drawer. "We've got a Caldwell family plot list," she said. "Most of them are over on the other side, by the oak. But Eli..." She trailed off, scanning a page. Her eyes moved slower, then stopped. "What?" I asked. She adjusted her glasses. It just says, burial noted, location uncertain. That's odd. There should be a plot number. But he's there, I said. I just saw the stone. She looked up at me, then back down at the paper. We've had some record issues over the years. Floods, fires, things moved. Sometimes the stones aren't where the records say they are. She closed the binder. Anyway, is he a relative of yours? No, I said. I just live across the street. Oh, she said, and then, a little softer. Some of those graves aren't what people think they are. Oral history and all that. Best not to worry too much about it. I felt something tighten in my chest. What does that mean? She gave me a polite museum smile. It means our records are incomplete, that's all. I didn't press her. I was tired, and it suddenly felt like a lot of work to force an answer out of someone who didn't really want to give it. That night, Marcus stayed late in Athens, working on a project. I had the house to myself. Rain was in the forecast again, but it hadn't started yet. The air felt heavy, like you could push it with your hand. I made myself some tea, took it to the living room, and sat with the lights low. Outside, the streetlight hummed. I could see the pale shapes of headstones when cars passed now and then, their headlights dragging across the cemetery like a flashlight beam. I must have dozed off because I remember opening my eyes and not knowing what time it was. The TV had gone to its quiet blue menu screen. The house was dark aside from that. My tea was cold. For a second, I didn't hear anything. Then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps. Not loud, but clear. One after another, slow, like someone walking barefoot on the wood floor. The boards creaked in places I knew by heart. Bedroom doorway, bathroom. That soft spot near the linen closet. Marcus, I called. The footsteps stopped. I stood up, heart beating faster now, but still trying to stay calm. Hey, you home? No answer. I picked up my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked toward the hall. The beam shook a little in my hand. The shadows jumped when I moved it. The doors were all open, the rooms empty. The back door was closed and latched tight. As I stood there, in that narrow space between the bedrooms, I realized the air felt colder again. That same fridge door feeling, only stronger. I could see my breath in the faint light from the phone. Behind me, from the living room, I heard my own voice. Trevor. Just that, my name, said exactly the way I say it. Same tone, same little drop at the end. I turned around so fast the light blurred. There was nobody there. The couch, the coffee table, the dark TV, the front window showing a slice of the street. Outside, the motion light clicked on with that soft pop, and light washed over the front yard, the street, the low brick wall, and the cemetery beyond. I walked to the window. The bench across the street was empty. The flowers on Eli Caldwell's grave were white this time, small and tight, like someone had just set them out for a funeral. They almost glowed in the stark motion light. My phone buzzed in my hand. I flinched and nearly dropped it. It was a text from Marcus, running late. You good? I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back. Yeah, fine. I stood there until the motion light timed out and the yard fell back into darkness. Later, lying in bed, I thought about the way my name had sounded. It wasn't an echo. I know what my voice sounds like bouncing off walls. This had the slight delay of someone else deciding to say it. The next day, I went up into the attic. I don't know why, exactly. The idea just sat in my head all morning at work, humming. I wanted to see what had come before us. Old houses collect paper, and I wanted to know if any of that paper would make me feel better. The attic was low and hot, even though the day wasn't that warm yet. Dust floated in the thin beams of light from the vents. I opened a few old boxes that had been there before I moved in. Most of it was junk, rusted curtain rods, a broken lamp, a stack of phone books from 10 years ago. Near the back corner, there was a flat box with some file folders. neatly stacked. Old lease agreements, receipts, that kind of thing. The house had changed hands a few times. I flipped through, more out of habit than real interest, until one of the papers made me stop. It was an insurance policy from the 1980s, the kind with the thick paper and typewriter font. The policyholder's name was printed near the top. Marcus E. Caldwell. Not my cousin. Different middle initial, different address, but the last name made my stomach drop a little. On the second page, in faded ballpoint pen, someone had scribbled a note in the margin. Caretaker's house. Do not move him. The pronoun was underlined twice. I sat there a long time, the paper getting damp in my hands from sweat. A train horn sounded faint and far away, the way it always did, but it felt closer somehow. I told myself Caldwell was just a common name, that the note could refer to anyone, that the caretaker might have lived somewhere else before, and the paper just ended up here. It was all probable, possible, logical. But none of those explanations felt like they were actually landing anywhere. I put the papers back in the box, climbed down, and closed the attic door. That night, I locked the back door. I checked it twice, hand on the cold metal of the deadbolt. I went to the front door, did the same. I walked through the house, turning off lights, hearing the wood give those small, familiar pops and groans. When I turned out the last light and the house went dim, I heard footsteps again. Slow, measured, from the back of the house toward the front. Not dragging, not hurried, just a steady, casual walk, like someone who knew exactly where everything was, who didn't need to feel for the walls in the dark. I stood there in the hallway, breathing shallow, listening. The steps stopped a few feet in front of me. The air cooled in that spot, brushing my face. For a second, it smelled like wet leaves and old stone, like the air across the street. Okay, I said quietly. I don't know why. Maybe I was talking to myself, maybe not. This is your place too, I guess. Nothing answered. After a while, the cold faded. I went to bed. I still live in that house. Marcus does too, though he spends more nights in Athens now, says it's because of work. I don't blame him. I've stopped trying to explain away every noise, every flicker of the light, every time I hear my name said in my own voice from the next room when I know I'm alone. I'm not sure what the records got wrong, or who was supposed to be where, or why that grave is set apart by the wall with a bench aimed straight at my front door. I don't know who wrote that note about not moving him, or if they meant the man in the ground, or someone else. I lock the doors every night, but I don't check them as many times as I used to. It doesn't feel like it makes much difference anymore. The flowers on that grave are always fresh,